Live.
We are live. Yay. So I
Um,
mean, as most people in my country are having barbecues and stuff, I'm sitting in my house. I mean, granted
oh
it's
yeah,
kind
it's
of bad out
Memorial
right
Day.
now. Memorial Day, yes. What's your equivalent of Memorial Day? You have an equivalent, right?
We have Remembrance Sunday, which is it's not for all the armed forces. Like it's not for every battle ever fought. It's just for World War One and World War Two. Um,
Ah, gotcha. Yeah.
we don't really have a day that like celebrates all of our war dead. Just because we don't really have the same culture of like venerating our army to the same
Come on.
degree.
You gotta get with it. You gotta become a warmonger, Jolly. Come on.
I'm French.
Uh,
Warmongering is not. We gave that up in the 1800s because it turned out we weren't very good at it. Uh,
Uh, don't you still have a day where you celebrate like the time where you decapitated all the people?
oh yeah, we have the Bastille Day, which
Yeah,
we
that's what it
celebrate
is.
the
Yeah,
revolution, and rightly
yeah.
so. Screw those people; they were terrible.
Yeah. But it's just like, oh, you venerate violence, but we're gonna have a day where we
Oh,
celebrate
dude,
all the guillotines.
that's the thing. Is like you should look at the French, like the translation of the French national anthem. We have a paragraph that talks about like cleaning the streets with impure blood. It's metal.
Oh my God. There was a video, you might have seen it. But there was a video recently where I think they raised taxes on some of the farmers in France, and they responded to that by like hosing down a bunch of government buildings with manure.
Yeah, see, it's a complicated one because the farmers are really it's a very right wing lobby in France, and there's a whole bunch of like uniquely French politics that goes in and around that, where like actually the farmers are just kind of being dicks, but never
Yeah.
mind. Anyway,
Uh,
we're not here to talk about farmers and manure. We're here to talk about a
no.
different kind of manure, and that is the manure that the Griftosphere has been putting out about Assassin's Creed. Is it called Shadows?
Shadows. Yeah, I didn't know if it was singular or plural. It's plural. It's shadows. Yeah, more
Okay.
than one.
Specifically, the outpouring of what I can only describe as pants twisting narcissism about Yasuke and his inclusion as one of the two playable protagonists in the game.
Oh
And
yeah. We should really
yeah,
emphasize
fun.
two
Yeah,
playable protagonists. There's
yeah.
two.
I guess that's the first thing, right? Because like people have been saying like, oh, it's really it's bad because some hand wavy appeal to the idea that they're somehow like sticking up for Japanese people, which like, oh, how good for you, man. White savoring in like the Japanese needed you to do that for them. like, but it's like I think the Japanese are fully capable of deciding what offends them for themselves, actually. But yeah, there is an entire second. They're like, oh yeah, it's bad to have a black man as the protagonist because it's a Japanese set game and it should be a Japanese protagonist. I'm like, there is one. She's called Naoe. She's on the front cover. You might have noticed her.
Yeah,
She's there.
and it's kind of it's a funny one because especially if you're like a Japanese person making this criticism, there's the whole argument of like, people in the Assassin's Creed community have been waiting for a game set in Japan for a while, and now that we finally have one, the Japanese character is a black man rather than a Japanese man. And to a certain extent, if that's the extent of your argument, if the extent of your argument is, well, I would have just preferred the first game in the series set in Japan to be a Japanese samurai. If that's the extent of your criticism, I'd be like, all right, if that's how you feel, then so be it. But the thing that kind of gets me is that a lot of the arguments seem to go a step further, and they're like, no, there's no way you can do this. You cannot have Yasuke be the protagonist. You cannot have or you shouldn't do it. Like Ubisoft shouldn't do it or couldn't do it. And those are the types of arguments that I will really like push back on. If it's like a
Yeah.
personal preference thing, I mean that's one thing, but it's all the arguments where it's like, no, you can't possibly do this. It's like
Well,
that's ridiculous.
even with the personal preference thing, just to address that quickly, I still have a slight issue in that like if someone's like, oh, I just I wanted a Japanese set game with a Japanese protagonist. I'm like, oh, okay, but you have a Japanese protagonist. And they're like, yeah, but I wanted it to only be a Japanese protagonist. I'd be like, okay, but like potentially fine, but why is that the impulse you want? Particularly because, the specific setting of this game is not in a period of Japanese history where Japan was culturally and socially totally in isolation. This is the point of Japanese history where Western powers have now started moving in on Japan in terms of like trade and battling over resources and looking to curry favor with local daimyos and rulers and shoguns. And so, given that this entire game series is about the battle between oppressive Templars looking to exploit and control people and assassins fighting for freedom, you'd think it would make sense then to recognize the fact that this is a period where outside forces are trying to come in and establish control over Japan, or gain power over Japan. And at that point, I don't really see the problem with having two protagonists, one of whom is the insider to this culture and one of whom is the outsider of this culture, so you can get both perspectives. I think that's an
Yeah,
interesting thing to do.
yeah, no, I completely agree. And, we can also talk a little bit about the fact that, like, um, it's not new to have a protagonist who is a foreigner, because that's one of, you've seen it obviously, and you've addressed some of it yourself. There's this argument surrounding this discourse about, like, well, all the other Assassin's Creed games have had a local be the signature character, or characters, I guess, in the case of the Fry twins in Assassin's Creed Syndicate, where you play as like a pair of English twins in England. It's like, but it's like, oh, you can only play as a local, a native to the culture. It's like, well, we have several examples where that's not the case already.
Oh yeah, like at least half the game. So like let's just, I mean, like, just for sake of thoroughness, let's run through them, right? Like AC1,
Mm.
Altair is obviously a local. Like he's from the Levant. He's Levantine.
Yeah,
But then like Ezio is obviously native to Italy. But then obviously in his third game, he's in Constantinople, to which he is definitely not a local. um,
yeah, yeah.
um, so that's in fact, like, as someone, I mean, he's not Venetian, but like the Venetians had been at war with the Ottomans for quite a while at that point. So if anything, he's a very much an outsider as an Italian.
Hmm.
um then you have AC3, where like, yeah, you do play as the indigenous, I'm trying to remember his actual native name. Is it Rakadun Gayadun? Connor.
Oh,
um
I forget what his native name is. I would have to look it up.
yeah, but like, Connor is Connor, what would you have me do, Kenway, is the incredibly boring protagonist for two-thirds of the game. But for the first third of the game, you're playing as his English father, Haytham, who is a
Yeah,
colonist. um,
yeah,
so that doesn't track. And then yeah, AC4, Black Flag, your Edward Kenway is a colonizing pirate, like he's a white man in the Caribbean. Um, then you have
and I
AC
guess,
Rogue, which,
and I guess to be fair with that one, it's geographically, obviously the Caribbean, he is not a native in that sense. But I guess within the framework of like the golden age of piracy, most of the most prominent pirates that existed in that era, because there was so much like colonialism going on from European powers in that part of the world, most of the prominent pirates that we know, like Bart Roberts and Blackbeard, etc., were European white men. But still, like, the fact remains, if you're going to use like, oh, you can only have a native of that area, that he technically is not one. So,
right, yeah, because that's not like the criticism is not people being like, oh, you're using characters who are historically inaccurate for the setting. And I'm like, no, no,
right,
no. The argument being put forward is it's insulting to use a character in a setting that isn't native to the setting. I'm like, well, that he's not native. And then like AC Rogue, like Shay is Irish and spends most of the time in the North Atlantic
yep,
and America.
yep.
So no. And then what was the one after? Actually, in between you got
Uh,
AC Liberty, where you're playing as Aveline Legrandpere, who is a black French person in America, who is
right,
obviously therefore not native.
yeah,
And
yeah.
then
Then you had
what was
Assassin's
after
Creed
Rogue?
Unity, so you had Arno.
Oh yeah, but he's French Austrian. So like, I mean, like, he is French, but he's also
Yeah,
not.
yeah.
He's not pure French. If we're gonna go down that incredibly pedantic route.
I mean, people
Um,
are. That's the thing. I mean,
yeah,
people
that's the
are
thing.
during this argument.
Like, speaking as a Frenchman, I just call him French, but people seem to be getting like, becoming the ethnicity police. So let's go down their logic. He's not pure French.
Yeah.
Um, Syndicate, yep, they're English. That's fine. But then like a lot of the companion characters in the game, including the one that Evie Fry falls in love with, is an Indian man, if I can remember correctly, like an Indian
Yes.
assassin.
Yes.
Um, and then, then you had Origins, where Bayak is native. Odyssey, Cassandra is native to
Hmm.
to Greece. I'm presuming Mirage. I mean, Mirage. I'm almost certain is the native one, isn't it?
He is, yeah, 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 because that takes place in Baghdad. Mirage is actually the only main game in the series I've not played. I played every other, but yeah, I know that one takes place in Baghdad, and I think he is from
We,
that area.
were you not interested in playing the assassin who apparently is the reincarnation of Loki? Did that not fascinate you? Did that not grip you?
It
You're
did
not just
not grip me,
dying to
no.
get that game. Yeah, God, like Jesus. Actually, yeah, and that brings us back to Ivor. Ivor's not native. She's a Norse invader of England and Ireland.
Yeah.
Um, so
Rip
and then goes to Finland,
rip
right, which
that
is in
argument.
America. So yeah,
Oh
completely
yeah.
ripped for that argument.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
Oh
just
yeah, she ends up dying in America, right? Like that's where she gets
yeah,
buried. Yeah.
absolutely. It's just the thing is, it's a very silly argument for very obvious reasons and very artistically restrictive to be like, oh, you can only have a protagonist of a game be native to the area the game is set in.
No, and
Um,
this is and honestly, not even just the Assassin's Creed series. If you want to go out of that, this is nothing new. Like we get stories like this all the time. It's been done with things like Dances with Wolves. It's been done with things like, The Last Samurai. It's been done with things like Avatar, and probably
Avatar,
yeah,
Pocahontas, yeah.
yeah, so many things where the main character is a foreigner, and that's the point. The whole point of that story, the story that's being told there, is that they are not a native, but they end up falling in love with the culture and becoming a part of a foreign culture. Like that's
Yeah,
that's what they're going
or
for with that.
or being used as an outside lens to explore, like to deconstruct myths about that culture.
Yeah.
Does with Wolves is as much a deconstruction of the myth of the noble savage as it is a love letter to native culture.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, it's incredibly artistically restrictive. It's also incredibly arbitrary. I don't understand. Well, I do understand why they're trying to bring this up now. We all know the reason they're trying to bring this up now,
Oh
but
yeah.
yeah, putting aside that elephant in the room, like, and if we were just going in totally good faith and just talking artistically, I don't see the artistic argument for making it for putting that kind of restrictive rule in place. Like,
No, it's ridiculous. I don't understand the element of like, oh, you cannot do this. It's like, since when? Since when and why?
watch me.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's like, I'm gonna do it anyway. Fuck you.
I like the idea we're going to apply this even to fictional settings. Like, oh, I'm not playing The Witcher 3 because Geralt isn't a native to any of the lands. He's not native to Skellige, so
Yeah,
we
yeah,
shouldn't be
yeah.
getting involved. It's
Oh
like,
yeah, and
okay,
no, that's so true. I didn't even think of that. Yeah, like you start to think about any given game where you're just, especially fantasy games like that, where you're constantly going to foreign lands and all these crazy different environments and stuff. It's like, yeah, why not something like that? Why are we not having an argument for that? It's like,
I
oh,
don't
well, it's
know.
fantasy like that. I don't know. They would come up with some stupid argument like that.
Well, yeah, because then they play the card of like, oh, because it's not insulting to a real life group, and I'm like, but it's not insulting to a real. I mean, unless you're being incredibly crass with your depictions, right? It's not insulting to a real life group to depict foreigners coming to their land and exploring their culture.
No.
Um,
Well,
it just isn't.
and that's the thing. Like, I have to imagine, because to be fair, we've not played the game yet. Nobody has, but I have to imagine, just based on how they've sold this premise and done the marketing for this game and everything, that they are going to very heavily lean on the fact that Yasuke is not a native. Like it's going to be very much like a fish out of water thing, like initially in his story. I'm sure. Like I sincerely doubt that he's just going to be like a samurai immediately.
Well,
Like it's the
it
kind of
depends
thing
when
that he's going to build towards.
Well, I guess it depends when they start the game, right? Because if they start it in 1581, he would just be arriving in Japan. But if it's set after the Honoji incident, then he's already a samurai. I just don't know when they're setting it. Is the point?
I just have to
Because like
imagine that just based on the like how they've done most of the games in the series thus far, where there's like a bit of an arc in that sense, a bit of a build up for the characters. I have to imagine that they're probably going to do it either shortly after he arrived or they're going to have him arrive like at the beginning.
well, so this
That's
is the
just my
thing.
prediction.
I imagine we are going to be seeing his journey from the arrival because the Honoji incident is like the assassination of one of the most important figures in Japanese history, one of the three great founders.
Yeah.
And so like, and he was present for that. So I imagine that'll be like the culminating final assassination of the game.
And they can
Uh,
have time jumps, by the way. Like there have been time jumps in the Assassin's Creed games. So,
oh yeah,
that's something that they could easily incorporate as well.
yeah. And it's just like Yasuke's the historical record of Yasuke kind of drops out after the Honoji incident when he's captured and when he surrenders after being captured and then is ransomed. Oh, not ransomed. He's released back to the Jesuit missionaries, and then he kind
Hmm.
of just vanishes from history. So there's like you could use that blank slate to do anything in that period if you want to.
Yeah.
Um, but like yeah, this why limit yourself? Just why not do both? Um,
Yeah. No, I
what was I going to
completely
say?
agree.
Oh yeah, in terms of like the appeal to like, oh, you have to have a native thing. Like and I'm going to bring this up because not only has this been a very popular TV show recently, but also it literally deals with the same time period, like give or take 20 years. And
Mm.
that's Shogun. Like
Yep.
Shogun is a television show where the main protagonist is a white outsider coming into
Yeah.
Japan,
Yeah.
who is elevated very quickly through the ranks to become a Hatamoto, which is a very high-ranking like samurai position in service to the main Japanese character Toranaga. And
Yep.
no one was complaining about that. No one seems to have an issue when that was a thing. And then what's funny is the response then becomes like, oh well, it's fine to have that guy because he's he's based on a historical figure of because the guy in the show is called James Blackthorne, and then in real life William Adams is the real life inspiration. But you're
Yeah.
like, but the problem is Shogun is less historically accurate than Yasuke is, because Yasuke is an actual real person who was actually there. He actually
Yeah.
was a samurai. We'll get into that discussion shortly. He was a samurai. Sorry, everyone. Um, and and presumably they'll be dealing with actual historical figures like Oda Nobunaga, whereas Shogun like just changed everyone's names and kind of rewrote history a little bit. So like Toranaga was actually Tokugawa Ieyasu in real life.
Yeah, it's much more
Um,
loose. It's much more like loosely like following history. And look, I'm sure that there's obviously going to be a lot of looseness when it comes to Assassin's Creed Shadows as
oh
well,
yeah,
because that's just Assassin's Creed. And that's something that we should, I think, make very clear. These games have never been like very strict when it comes to historical accuracy. They've taken a lot of liberties in the past, and
that's not
I imagine
true.
that's going to continue.
Pope Alexander definitely had a fist fight. The Pope in full regalia had a fist fight with an Italian assassin in the basement of the Sistine Chapel over alien artifacts. That's definitely something that actually happened in real life.
Oh God.
The Greek gods were actually alien precursors, or not aliens, I guess they're from Earth, right? But like precursor civilization people who stopped a giant solar flare during the Toba incident. I just this feels like a very strange point. Again, we know the reason, but this feels like a very strange point to be arbitrarily drawing the like it has to be historically accurate line.
Yeah, it's
Like
like when did you start that? Like when did you
what
decide that?
one of the funny things I've seen is that people like keep referring back to, because I don't know if you remember back with AC1, in the trailer for AC1 before the game dropped, it shows like Altair performing an assassination using a crossbow, like
Yeah,
a shoulder pulled crossbow, and
yeah.
obviously like there weren't those kinds of crossbow back in the era of the Second and Third Crusades,
Hmm.
so they removed it when the game came out. Like you didn't have that weapon; it wasn't available. I
Yeah.
think they replaced it with throwing knives, or just expanded the throwing knife mechanic. And so
Yeah.
people were like, "Oh, people have now gone back and been like, oh, see, they do care about historical accuracy because they did this." And I'm like, "That was AC1, which, by the way, still has all the alien civilization bullshit in it."
Oh
Um,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
so that's nonsense. The idea that they're being super historically accurate, but also like, yeah, that was when the series was like finding its footing. Like since then, they've become much, much looser. Like, dude, in fucking Valhalla, you can find Mjolnir.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
what
Oh,
are
I
we what are
forgot
we
about that. Oh
doing?
shit. Yeah, like
What, what are
that's
we
totally accurate. Totally. I
Yeah,
mean,
what are we doing talking about historical accuracy when we're like, I think that ship has sailed. If that was your criticism, I'm sorry, but you should have addressed that back in AC2.
yeah, and I guess I do think that a line should be drawn somewhere. Um, in terms of like there should be a base level of historical accuracy because otherwise what's the point? I mean, the whole point of the games is that you have this series that basically spans through the ages. Each game will take place in a different location, different time period. So naturally, when you're going to those locations and time period, you're going to want to have like at least some element of accuracy. But it doesn't need to be like it's never going to be like an exact replication of what you would get in that location or time period. It's not going to happen. And obviously they've taken plenty of liberties beyond that. So I don't know, like this is not news to anybody who knows anything about Assassin's Creed, but apparently now it's becoming a topic. I'm even trying to think about like the discourse from previous Assassin's Creed games, and trying to really remember if any of this ever like came up again, or came up to this extent. And I'm kind of
I
drawing a
can't
blank.
recall.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like
I can't
not
recall
on
any
this
kind of
level.
discussion about this.
Yeah, it
Um, it,
maybe little things here and there, but like not to this level.
I think just to address the point just made, which I think is really interesting, which is where do you draw the line for Assassin's Creed? And I guess like that's going to be where you draw the line in any game is going to be premised on like what the game is trying to accomplish. So like in Kingdom Come Deliverance, which is meant to be like a very realistic portrayal of like 16th century Bohemia or 15th century Bohemia, whatever it is,
Yeah, yeah.
um, having 15% population be black or diverse would be very jarring, because like that is just not what was the case in Bohemia. So if that's what you're going for, is just complete historical accuracy, then yeah, that would be jarring.
Yeah.
But with Assassin's Creed, the idea has always been like, yes, history is like it is in the real world. However, that's just the official history. Like secretly, there's been this secret war going on, and like history's been rewritten sometimes. And so, as long as you can give good explanations for why the mass public in that universe wouldn't be aware of these events, you can basically do whatever you want, right? Like
Yeah.
you couldn't kill off. Well, actually, maybe you could. It could be like, oh yeah, we killed Da Vinci as a 20-year-old, but then like he was replaced by one of his pages who was also like a brilliant mathematician, and he just took over the identity. But as far as history is concerned, that was just Da Vinci all the way, right? You could do
Yeah.
that if you wanted, because there's nothing to say that that's not what happened, at least in this universe.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I can just address the comment section, because I think it's time now to get onto this whole thing of like, let's talk actually now about how historically accurate is Yasuke.
Yeah.
What actually is the history? Because Silent Sam says, like, is it fair to say that for some people, myself included, Yasuke being a playable character is so jarring because they're unfamiliar with Japanese history? And I think this is the case, that like the Western world has a very skewed idea of Japanese history, because basically our only exposure to it really is like manga and anime. Like most people
Yeah.
do not study Japanese language and history.
Yeah.
Um, and I think most sane people therefore go in with with that realization of their own the limits of their own knowledge, and they go like, oh, okay, maybe this is an opportunity for me to learn or explore. And like, yeah, maybe initially it's a bit of a jarring moment, because I was like, oh, there's a black guy in 1581 in Japan. Um, and then you get past that and you just have a good time with the game and learn about Yasuke.
Yeah.
But there is a certain subsection of nerd culture which like fetishizes Japan and Japanese history and culture to like a slightly alarming, if not actually not even slightly, just an alarming degree, and a slightly racist degree as well in some versions of it. And
Yeah.
we were kind of saying this before the stream started. I think one of the reasons people react so badly to Yasuke of all people is because they have in their head like a large part of their own sense of identity is built around the idea that they know a lot about Japan, and the fact that they don't know about this. Therefore, like
Yeah.
rather than just go, maybe I'm ignorant, they've just gone, oh yeah, no, this is just wrong. Then I must be right. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. I think there is an element of hubris to that, at least when it comes to some people.
uh,
Sorry, go ahead.
no. After you.
Um, uh, and I think some of it is probably informed by the fact that uh, everything, unfortunately, or almost every new piece of media that comes out, has to become a so-called culture war battlefield, and like this is no different. It's just yet another thing for people to hang their hat on when it comes to like the culture war. And I guess they see, like you said, there is an element of like, yes, on the surface, without any prior knowledge of this event in history, seeing a black guy in feudal Japan, it would be like an eye-catching thing, and you'd be like, "Oh, that's kind of strange. Is this something that actually happened, or is this something that they're just pulling out of their ass?" Like, I don't blame anybody who like doesn't understand the time period to like have that question in their mind when they first see this. But then once you've actually like figured out that he was a real figure, and once you kind of accept that like they take historical liberties with Assassin's Creed anyway, I just don't see what the big deal is. I don't see why this needs to become yet another culture war thing to fight over.
Yeah,
It
I mean,
just it doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
I can't be the only person in the world. I mean, I'm sure you fall into this category as well. There's just people who are thoroughly fed up with the culture war. Like, Jesus,
Oh
please
yeah,
stop this.
yeah,
I'm just so bored of people waging really bad identity politics, like, and also just really ignorantly and poorly informed identity politics on each other. To substitute for the fact that they just don't want to have to think for themselves,
yeah.
or confront the world, or do anything to actually address their own mental states. It's just really wearing on everybody else, and I'm getting really bored of it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's getting like really tiresome. And look, there will even be the occasional thing where it's like, all right, they've gone a little overboard. It's a little ridiculous in terms of what they're trying to achieve here. Um, in terms of like, oh, we need to have the like this culture represented here. Like we need to have this culture represented here. Sometimes it comes off as a little desperate. But I don't know. Either way, like in either direction, I'm kind of tired of it. I'm just tired of like of having those debates and conversations every time something happens. It's just,
Well, that's the thing,
I
right?
don't
Because
know.
on the one hand, you have corporations engaging in like rainbow capitalism, for want of a obviously that just refers specifically to queer people, but like there's a racial version of that as well, like like diversity capitalism, basically, where like you make a pretense of representation or you make a pretense of addressing these issues because they're hip and in vogue, and you think you can use it as a marketing gimmick to sell your thing.
Yeah,
um, make it a token of the culture wars, and people will buy it for loyalty's sake. And
yeah,
then the idiots on the other side fall for that and go like, "Oh, see, this proves there's a secret agenda to control the world with diversity and wokeness." And like actual people who actually give a shit in the middle are just like, "What are you both talking about? Like, you're both
yeah.
insane. Please stop."
Yeah, and there's so many other things to talk about when it comes to like just Ubisoft in general. I mean, their monetization practices are just
Oh
ridiculous. They
yeah,
have been for a while, and that hasn't changed at all.
the mass
Um,
layoffs, the
oh
incredibly
yeah,
poor game design, the outdated like modeling, the f- endless fucking fetch quests.
yeah.
Um, just there's so much to talk about. And even if you want to do like the representation stuff and talk about representation, like there's a lot you can talk about in terms of just like them getting things wrong. Like not even
Mm.
the sense of like, oh, I'm upset that there's a gay person in my game, or I'm upset there's a black person in my game. It's just I'm upset they've done such a piss poor job of giving an accurate rendition of what it was actually like to be a gay person in XYZ period, or to be black in XYZ period.
Yeah.
Um, that's the thing I get annoyed about. Like it's almost like actually we'll use the real example of this because I think it ties back in to something that people have leveled as a criticism of this, was like, oh, if you want a black character, why not have Assassin's Creed Africa? And like we had that, it was called Origins. Do you not know where Egypt is? But, um, although Bayek I don't think is black, right? Like he's native Egyptian, so he's like darker skinned, but not he's North African. He's not sub-Saharan.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
he's a Medjay, I think. He's a like a Nubian Medjay, I think.
is he Nubian? Oh, in that case, he should be black. I think he's just meant to be North African, right? Because a Medjay
Uh,
is a job description. Like Medjay is his title. Like it's
right,
just
right,
it's
right.
a warrior class.
I'm trying to I thought he was Nubian. Um, I don't know. And I don't
Um,
even know where Siwa is located in relation to
oh,
the rest of
Siwa's
Egypt, to be honest.
North Egypt. It's like if you go to like Alexandria and then go west, you'll get to Siwa.
Hmm, gotcha. Okay. But either way though, like it's still fitting, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. But like the reason I bring that up is like to use an example where it has been like where representation is done badly or improperly. The recent spate of like Cleopatra being black thing, um,
Oh
which
yeah.
is annoying to me because no, she wasn't. Like historically, no, she wasn't. She was Macedonian Greek, and she was a colonizer. She was a colonizing class that ruled Egypt.
Yep.
Um, but the part of the reason that irritates me, other than just it's historically inaccurate, is people them what that reveals to me about what these corporations think about representation is like, oh, to be African is just to be sub-Saharan black. That's all Africa is. This vast continent with multiplicities of different skin tones and cultures and all of this. It's just you can just reduce it to like, do you have dark skin? That's all. Yeah, there you go. That's all we need.
Right.
I'm like, that is so fucking racist. Can you not
Yeah.
do that actually?
Yeah, and that's, they're hardly alone in that, unfortunately. That's something that comes up a lot, especially when it comes to Cleopatra. People just assume that because she was present in the continent of Africa, that means she must have been black. It's just like, okay, there's there's so many complications to that
Yeah,
that
it's
get in the way of that, and it's yeah, I mean,
it's
uh, th-
hugely dismissive.
yeah, yeah, and it's very dismissive. But I mean, even if we go past the element of okay, you want a native, you want somebody who's native to the culture that the game is set in. I mean, I don't. Well, we have one. We have one in this game, as we mentioned early on in the
Yeah,
stream.
we have
There
Nawe.
is, yeah, we have Nawe. We have a second playable protagonist who, and I have to imagine that it's going to be somewhat similar to Assassin's Creed Syndicate, where you played as the Fry twins, and each of the two characters probably have their own main story missions where you have to play as one or the other. But then through the rest of the game, when you're just kind of exploring around, free roaming and such, you can probably play as whoever you want. And I don't know, for a lot of these people complaining, like they could probably just play as Nawe for the bulk of the game if they want to. If they so desire to just play as a Japanese character for most of the game, they could just play as her.
Yeah, from what I understand of the gameplay, the way it's going to work is, for most missions you can pick because like they represent different playstyles, right? So like Yasuke is going to be like just the tank, like he's a warrior. You just battle your way through, you fight your way through with honor.
Right.
Whereas like Naoe is the shinobi, she is the assassin. She hides in the shadows and strikes from on high, and she's like a glass cannon.
Yeah.
Um, and like so, most missions, from what I understand, is you can choose which one you want to play as. But some missions will be like, no, you have to be Naoe because this is like Yasuke just couldn't do this, or Naoe wouldn't be able to sneak in here, and you have to do a head-on assault. So we're going to use Yasuke for this mission, right?
Yeah, more combat
But
focused
by
or
and large,
stealth focused. Yeah.
yeah, but by and large, depending on which playstyle you want, you just pick whichever character you would rather play as.
Yeah. And it's just, it's been so funny when it comes to the discourse to see so many people just ignore her. That's like
She's
the
literally on the
discourse.
front cover.
Yeah, 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 and that's where all the jokes have been coming from. It's like she's such a good shinobi. She's so stealthy that people forget that she even exists. It's like, yeah, that's so true though. Like
No
the
way, the most
discourse
skilled assassin
surrounding.
in the series so far.
Yeah, yeah, she is seriously the most skilled assassin in the series. But it's like, yeah, the discourse surrounding her has just been completely non-existent. Nobody's talking about her. And it's just very
I
strange. Like,
I anticipate that we're going to get to a point where people get bored of Yasuke, like as a hot button topic in the griftosphere, and they're just going to go, "Oh, it had to be a female protagonist for Japan," and you're like, "Jesus Christ!"
no, well, it's funny. It's funny you mentioned that because I mean, I don't like to name specific names, but I think this guy's such an asshole that I'm just gonna bring him up. Synthetic Man.
Oh
Do you
yeah,
know him? You know him?
I know of him. I wish I didn't, but I know of his
Yeah.
existence.
No,
Yes.
exactly. Me too. Unfortunately, I watched like part of his video on this subject. I wish I hadn't because it made me want to like shoot myself. But he to his credit did mention Nawe. He did get to her. And he's like, "Yeah, well, she is Japanese to be fair, but she's got a manly face and a strong jaw." I was just like, "Are you fucking kidding me? Are
Oh,
you fucking kidding me?"
stop!
Like, yeah, that's where he had to move the goalpost to. It's like, yes, yes, we have a Japanese character, but she's manly. She looks like a man, which, by the way, I don't think she does.
I don't see that at all.
This is another thing. Like, I am so tired. It came up again with the new Lara Croft. Like when they revealed the new Lara Croft a few months ago, there were a bunch of chuds being like, "Oh, she looks manly." I was like, What are you people smoking? What is wrong with you? She doesn't look manly."
Like the idea that like the athletic Tomb Raider has to look dainty. It's like what the athletic Tomb Raider is not allowed a six pack. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, and she still looks feminine. Like, what are you people doing? Like, I
I
don't get it.
Okay, just a general rule of thumb, but like anyone who looks at a female video game protagonist and then and their first thought was to crack out a ruler and start measuring bits of their body, I'm like,
Ugh.
there's something wrong with you. Like,
Yeah, like there is
go
something
touch
wrong with your
grass.
brain. Yeah, like seriously, like it's
I like that they just do it on
ugh.
dates. Like, I mean, if these people ever get dates, like they go to
No,
they go
no,
to the
they don't.
restaurant or
They don't.
whatever, they just crack out like a compass and a protractor and they start like measuring angles on this girl.
Oh
And she's like,
God.
what are you doing? It's like, I'm making sure you're not a man. And she's like, okay, you're paying and I'm leaving. Fuck you, you weirdo.
Also, if you keep it up, I might call the cops on you.
Yeah, like, oh my, it's strange. Anyway, though, let's
Ugh.
actually talk about the historical accuracy of Yasuke because this is where it gets really fucking funny. Because one of the arguments that I have seen leveled, I'm sure you
Mm.
have too, about why Yasuke is a bad character and just DEI and all sorts of other buzzwords, is that like, oh well, in real life he was like a slave. He was like he was an oddity, like that Oda Nobunaga, who was the warlord who he served, just collected, and like he wasn't really a samurai. He was basically just a servant, or and a curiosity.
Oda was
Um,
collecting black people. That's what he did in his spare time.
Yeah, which like I mean, first of all, like Yasuke was not the only black guy in Japan at the time. There were at least several hundred brought by the Portuguese. So, like,
Yeah,
yes, Yasuke was an oddity, but he wasn't a unique phenomenon. Um, but on top of that, like historically, it's just nonsense. It's just total bullshit. Like the word that I see
yeah.
people latching onto, which is like, what's really funny is like the Wikipedia war over this, where like Wikipedia, I think the original article it had like about Yasuke used the word retainer, which is technically an accurate English translation of it, but but obviously it's colored then by English connotations of that word that are not present in Japanese.
Yeah.
But now, when historians try to correct that, like people have like these charts have gone into Wikipedia and like done like an editing war, which is like totally against
Yeah.
Wikipedia's terms of service, by the way. But like it's just
I heard about
it
that.
is
I
just
heard that
funny.
they were fighting over the page like a couple weeks back, weren't they?
Yeah, because
Like ever
these
since
people
like
are
the
like, oh,
news.
I can't accept that I might be wrong, so I'm going to go back and edit the records to support my nonsense
I'm
rather
going
than
to
just follow
change
the
history to make me feel
yeah.
more comfortable. Yeah.
Like
It's
the
just
the
oh
Ask Historians Reddit page started banning people because they kept on spamming like historians and telling them they're wrong. They're like, "Fuck off!" Like, no, we're
yeah.
not.
Well, no,
um,
real quick, I do want to go back to the point that you were talking about, but I do want to address a comment real quick.
yeah, go for it.
Do you know if Nawe is based on anyone in Japanese history, or is
I'm
she a
pretty sure
completely
she's an
original
original
character?
character.
That's what I
I'm pretty
thought
sure
as
she's
well, but I
original.
didn't. Yeah, I didn't know if she was like loosely based on somebody, but yeah, I think she's completely original.
If she is, it's escaped my notice. Which, to be fair, I because of the Yasuke discussion, I've not been paying potentially close attention to the creative decisions behind Nawe. But my
Yeah.
understanding is, and I could be wrong, but my understanding is that she's an original character. Um,
I have to imagine, because it's funny. One of the criticisms of Assassin's Creed Valhalla, is that it felt like the Viking premise was very much at odds with the traditional assassin elements that you will find in the games, to the point that like the character you're playing as, Eivor, like she never officially becomes an assassin. She even like opposes that when one of the assassin characters in the game, I forget his name. It's not Basim. It's not the one in Mirage. It's the other
oh, it's
one.
the other one. Yeah, I
It
know who you're
starts with
talking
an
about, but I can't
H.
remember
It's
the
it,
name.
it starts with an H. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But anyway,
Oh,
he
Hatham. It's
offers her.
Hatham.
Oh yeah, yeah, or Hytham, yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
I think it's Hytham. Yeah, he basically offers her a chance to join the assassins, and Eivor basically turns them down. It's like, oh, okay, so the Assassin's Creed game has a signature character, a protagonist where you never even officially become an assassin. So it's kind of weird. I don't know. But in any case, I feel like maybe in this game, Nawe might be like the actual assassin character. I don't just mean
Oh
in
yeah,
terms of
she
her
is.
play style. I mean like she will actually be part of the order or whatever, you know?
Yeah, I think that's the case because if they're following on from continuity, which I mean, Assassin's Creed, who knows?
Yeah.
But if I remember correctly, like Ezio, they had that little short film right for Ezio, how he died, where he trains or like he meets a Chinese assassin, female Chinese assassin who comes to talk to him,
Yeah.
because like the assassin's having a really rough time in China at the time, and he
Hmm.
like gives her it's either like a book of instructions that he wrote or like something to help her, and then she
Yeah.
goes back. And I
Yeah.
think they're going to be like the Japanese Assassin's Order is like is an offshoot of the Chinese one that they
Hmm.
were brought over from the China, which
Yeah.
I guess kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
Probably came over with the Buddhism and all that stuff. So maybe
Yeah.
yeah, I think that'll be the follow on. And
That
then
could be
yeah, so that yeah,
interesting. Yeah.
Nawe will be officially the assassin character who's officially part of the order. In fact, I think again, like I think part of the gameplay is like the assassin's hideout will be Nawe's hideout, and that you can customize it as the game goes on.
Yeah,
Um,
and then Yasuke will probably like become her ally or something. Like something like that. I don't know.
yeah, an alliance, like, alliance of convenience
Hmm.
potentially. I wouldn't actually even be shocked if they end up on opposite sides because like if the end mission is her assassinating Oda Nobunaga, and that's the guy Yasuke
Oh
serves.
shit. Wow. I didn't even think of that. That
That
would actually be a really interesting thing. Um,
yeah.
I don't know if you ever played the game A Way Out. It was that co-op game where you play as two
Oh, the
guys who
Prison
end up
Break
in
one.
prison. Yeah, yeah, the prison break. And then there's a whole bunch of things that end up happening later on. Definitely take a bunch of inspiration from like famous crime movies and stuff. But in any case, there is something similar that happens in that where these two characters that you are constantly with throughout the game, and that you can actually co-op as with a friend. They end up kind of on opposing sides later on in the game. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
I don't
just
know.
something
They
you need
could
to
do
do.
something similar there. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that'd be an interesting thing. I mean, you kind of did that in Assassin's Creed Origins, right? Where like you're working with Cleopatra for a while, and then it turns out Cleopatra's actually your enemy.
Well,
Um,
yeah, but Cleopatra wasn't like a player character. She wasn't a playable
no, no,
character.
of
So,
course, but yeah,
but
but
yeah,
it's just an extension of that idea. Like, yeah, I think that's something they could do. But
yeah,
to get back to the discussion, right? Because the retainer discussion, which is
yeah,
like people people translate the retainer into English as as retainer as like a kind of servant or page or whatever it is. Like that's not what it's not what it means in Japanese. Like I think the word is actually a kosho, which is essentially like a personal servant slash bodyguard. And like the word retainer in English would therefore be in the sense of like someone who is retained to do, like paid to do a service. Like he is a
Right.
paid warrior. Um, he is his official title I think was like weapons bearer to Oda Nobunaga, which is like a position of incredible trust. This is a period where people were routinely, in fact, later on he would be assassinated. This is a period where civil war is endemic and people are routinely murdered by their allies. So
Hmm.
having him in your inner retinue as part of like your 30 loyal warriors out of the other thousands that you employ and have loyalty to you, and to have him be your personal weapons carrier, that's a position of enormous trust and rank. He very much was a warrior. He fought in the Hanoji incident. He had his he was presented with a sword. He was in every sense part of the Kishindan, which is like the name for a clan's like warriors on retainer, like their standing army, and is
Yeah.
different from say like an Ashigaru, which is like the conscripted peasantry that forms like the bulk of your army. He's but the point is like retainer here means professional soldier. He is a samurai in the sense of that, in the sense of what the word samurai meant at the time.
Yeah.
Um,
Like I don't think, because that's the thing. I don't there's people are creating this false dichotomy where for some reason he has to either be like a pet or a slave or whatever derogatory like class you want to call it, or he has to be like the most prominent samurai like of the era. Like for some reason that seems to be how people are treating this. It's like this false binary where he has to be one or the other. It's like, no, he is a warrior. He might not be like the most renowned warrior like there, but he still is one. Like retainer is still a warrior.
Absolutely. And there's also this, I think, like projection of Western like concurrent ideas onto this. So like people seem to be treating the word samurai like it means like a knight, which is not what it
Yes.
means, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
they'll be
yeah.
like, oh, to be a knight is to be like a member of the aristocracy. And like, here's the thing, like samurai clans were like, if you were a noble clan, you would by definition also be samurai because the noble clans were warrior clans.
Yeah.
This was a period of intense civil war. Everyone's fighting. But that's just one. Being a nobleman and being a samurai are different things.
Yeah, yeah.
Samurai just basically means like is a social caste determined by the job you do. Like if you do this job, you are this rank, you are this caste. And
Yeah.
so he was part of the bushi, the warrior class. He was a samurai. He did the job of being a professional fighter. Therefore, he was by definition a samurai. That's what it means to be a
Yeah,
samurai.
yeah.
It
There's
doesn't mean to be
like
like knighted on the battlefield or anything.
no, exactly. Yeah, people I think are trying to be like, "Oh, he's just like a foot soldier. He's not an actual samurai." Like that's how they're kind of treating it. But
Yeah, and also he wasn't just a foot soldier; he was part of the inner retinue. He was very,
I
very
I
trusted.
know. I know. Yeah, but that's how people are treated it. They're like, "Oh,
Yeah,
he's not a real one."
like one of the
Ugh.
interesting things there is like so one of the marks of being a samurai in this period is that you were paid something called a fuchi, which is like essentially it would translate as like a rice stipend. Essentially, just the professional payment you get for being a soldier. And like we know from records that he was paid a fuchi. That's something that's mentioned in what's the guy called Matsudaira Ietada, who was a samurai at the same time who wrote a
Yeah.
diary, and we have that record. So we know that Yasuke was like there is no context in which Yasuke could have been a kosho who was paid a fuchi where he would not have been a samurai.
Yeah.
It's just that's just not a thing. So
Yeah.
not only was he a samurai, he was a higher rank than most Japanese people were at the time. So like,
Yeah. Yeah, and this is and there's also the element of because we spoke about this before the stream started. Even if he was the lowest class you could possibly imagine in society, there's also the element of who cares? Like you can change things around a little bit.
oh
I
yeah,
mean, because
absolutely.
as Assassin's Creed has done, I mean, we talked about earlier. I mean, the most ridiculous example of them breaking history is Ezio having a fist fight with the Pope. It's like they will bend and twist history when they feel the need to, or when they
Dude,
want to.
Pythagoras in this universe lived for hundreds of years because he has a magic staff that gave him like pseudo immortality, and then he
In
gets to
Atlantis,
Cassandra.
he was in
Yeah,
Atlantis.
Cassandra turns up in the Ireland expansion of Valhalla, like 800 years, like 1,000 years after she was supposed to be dead.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. She turns up
So
there. So you
it's just
can do that. Like even if so, like we talked about this earlier, but there's multiple layers to this. I think there is enough historical accuracy to defend Yasuke from the criticisms that have been levied against him. But even if there weren't, there's also the next fallback that you have after that, in which Assassin's Creed, despite taking place in historical settings and having some element of historical accuracy will bend history when it feels the need to. And Yasuke could be no different. And obviously, we don't know everything about his life anyway, so they're going to have to take liberties regardless.
Yeah, we know very little. I mean, beyond the references to him serving in Nobunaga and how he was taken into service, we know very little about him. Like he was potentially he potentially started off as a slave from somewhere like Mozambique or Ethiopia or Nigeria, but like by the time he made it to Japan with Alessandro, what's it called? I do have it written down somewhere. Give me a second to check my notes because I can't remember his name. Alessandro Valeniano, who was the Jesuit missionary he came with to
Mm.
Japan with. He was probably in his employ as a free man, as a bodyguard, because missionaries weren't allowed to carry weapons at the time, and it was a very dangerous period. So he was
Yeah,
probably hired for protection. And like,
yeah,
indeed, one of the things we are told about him in the sources is like Yasuke was like 6'2" and really strong and quite
yeah,
intelligent.
yeah,
So like he was, a man with talents, basically.
yeah.
Um,
I doubt
and
he
then
would have
I guess
lasted
just to
long in that sort of environment if he wasn't, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And like he spoke fluent Japanese when he was by the time he was in Nobunaga service,
Yeah.
which obviously he would have had to, otherwise he wouldn't have been able to be in direct service to the warlord all the time.
Oh yeah.
Uh, and again, like just as the interesting thing, because obviously like we talked a little bit about the Hanoji incident and Nobunaga's assassination, but like one of the interesting things about that is not only did Yasuke like fight in that and like to the last man with them, there was a point where like of the inner retinue who was slaughtered, Yasuke, Nobunaga, and a guy called Mori Ranmura, who was like an attendant slash lover of Nobunaga, which we can talk about when we talk about the homosexuality discussion because that's going to be fun. Um, they were like the last people standing, and so Nobunaga decided to commit seppuku, which is like the honorable suicide way to avoid being captured and humiliated by your enemies.
Yeah.
And Yasuke was his second. Yasuke was the man who decapitated him as part of that process, which is again a position of enormous trust. You don't just make anyone your second.
Right.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah, like not just anybody would have that honor.
yeah, for people who've seen Shogun, that's actually a thing that happens a lot in Shogun. Is like who you choose to be your second is really important. Like it's very culturally important and reflects your rank. You know,
Yeah.
I forget his name in Shogun, but like one of Yashubige. Anyway, one of
Oh
Toranaga's like
yeah, yeah.
underlings. Like
Yeah.
when he is sentenced to death by Toranaga, he requests that Toranaga be his second because that is honorable.
Mm.
Um, and
Yep.
Toranaga agrees. So
Hmm.
yeah, it's just one of those things where like people just on the historical record just need know fuck all about Yasuke. A lot of them just butcher his name as well. They want to make pretensions to like caring about Japanese culture, and then they call him Yasuke, which just drives
Yasuke,
me
yeah.
insane. Yeah,
Yeah.
like Yasuke.
I mean,
Um,
I guess it's the most literal like way to pronounce that, you know?
oh sure, but don't tell me that you're coming from a position of like knowledge and care about Japanese culture, and then
Yeah.
get basic pronunciation wrong. Like it
It's
kind
like,
of undermines your
actually,
credibility.
he's a retainer, not a samurai, actually.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you just sit there being like, fuck all, and it's painful to watch.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, it's like I don't know, and uh, the thing I don't really get with this is that they've why now? Like why is now the time that this is all getting brought up? When there have been
Well,
so many. No, go ahead.
because we know it's
It's
because culture
because of
war
the race.
bullshit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The
Yeah,
culture war bullshit and the race and everything. Um, no, nobody had a problem with it in Shogun when you had Blackthorn.
a white man. Yeah,
Um, I mean, and I guess to be fair, I have seen some criticisms over the years when it comes to something like The Last Samurai. I have seen some of those criticisms where people will talk about Tom Cruise's character, but I feel like most of the time, whenever people make those criticisms, it's often coming from people who didn't actually see the movie. They just look at the movie poster and they see Tom Cruise wearing samurai armor and they
right.
just assume that he's like either portraying a Japanese character or he just I guess just immediately starts off the movie as a samurai when in reality like the fact that he is a foreigner, the fact that he is like an American man who's there to train the Imperial Army, that's actually like very important to the story being told, you know? But people
Well,
just look at like a goofy, in their mind, they see a goofy poster of like, oh, Tom Cruise is wearing Japanese armor. Like, that's ridiculous, you know?
yeah. I mean, there's two different. I mean, like there's two times where I think it's legitimate to criticize that a white person in or even just like a person of any race being in a film where the majority race is not their race, and that is when you're either race bending an actor, like having an actor in yellow face or blackface or whatever, which is obviously extremely distasteful for very obvious historical reasons, about
Yeah.
surrounding the depiction of ethnic minorities in Western culture.
Yeah.
Like when, and I feel bad for her because like I don't think she knew, and she's a very nice person, but Emma Stone, or Emily Stone, I think she wants to be called now, when she was playing a native Hawaiian character in a movie, and you're like, you are the whitest of white girls. What are you doing?
Yeah. I mean,
That's cringe. But
yeah.
the other one though is obviously like the trope of the white messiah. Like the
Yeah.
idea, like, oh, these, the white character's going to come in and teach these savages how to actually do things, and like people incorrectly apply that to the Tom Cruise character. Algrim is called, like, right? Nathan Algrim.
Yeah. Yeah.
In Last Samurai, where they're like, oh, he came in to save the Japanese. Like, no, actually, it's the opposite. He comes in as an outsider to train, because some Japanese people want him to train a Western style army. And then through the course of the movie, he actually learns the value of the traditional Japanese culture. And he's the one who's taught, and he's the one who takes part as like an underling. Like, he helps plan the final battle, but not, he's not masterminding it. He's not saving them.
No, no. The only
They save him.
exactly, yeah. And I would say that the only significant thing that he does in terms of how he influences their culture is he ultimately convinces fuck, what's Ken Watanabe's character?
Katsumoto.
Katsumoto, yeah. He convinces Katsumoto not to kill himself at the very end. This is after Katsumoto's son has just died. So Katsumoto is in like kind of a very low place at the moment. And Algren basically convinces him not to take his own life, at least not yet, and to actually stick it out so that they can fight one last battle. So I guess,
But then he does actually help him commit seppuku at the end.
yeah, he does help him commit it at the end, but I guess in that moment he saves his life so that they can make one final stand against the Imperial army and send a message to the Emperor.
Yeah, but I guess the point there is like that isn't his, that isn't like I'm teaching these people something different about,
No,
something new
no.
to their culture. That's just like, no, there is honor, right? Like, there is honor in the Japanese understanding of honor right now in not doing that and making one last stand to get your message across, and then
Yeah.
going out.
Exactly. Yeah. And throughout the movie, it's the two of them learn from each other, but yeah, you're right. Like they end up saving him. And more than anything else, he learns from their culture and he becomes a part of their culture rather than the other way around,
Yeah, if anything, like the Western culture is what's dragged him down to misery, and it's the Japanese understanding of the world that actually pulls him out of it.
Yep.
But yeah,
I don't know.
I kind of more. Sorry,
Okay.
what kind of more straightforward, like white savior, white messiah trope would be like, I can't remember his name because I never watched the damn film, other than like through my fingers on a Sunday afternoon and cringing, which was The Great Wall with Matt Damon, where they just basically had him come in and save the Japanese, save the Chinese, and you're like, oh my goodness.
Oh God, I've not seen that actually. It just looked too cringe. I remember seeing a trailer for it, and I was like, this is so fucking Hollywood. I can tell you that right now.
It's bad. It's like, oh, dragons and monsters are attacking the Great Wall, and this white man's going to tell us how to save ourselves. Like, oh, okay.
I see what you're doing. I see what you're doing there. Oh, God. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. And we've not played the game yet, so we don't really know what direction they're going to take. I mean, there's obviously historical events that they are going to lean on when it comes to Yasuke, but we don't know what other liberties they're going to choose to take until we actually play the game. But I don't see this being the type of story where like his influence and his culture is going to override theirs. I just don't see that happening when it comes to this.
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, I sincerely doubt Yasuke's going to be walking around being like, now let me tell you about native Mozambique culture.
No.
I just somehow I don't quite see that happening.
Yeah, like there might be some reference to like his history and stuff and his past. But I don't see it taking center stage.
Oh, you know what's definitely going to happen is they're going to have, because obviously like he would, right? Like someone's going to talk to him because obviously the whole philosophy of the assassins is about liberty, right?
Yeah.
Someone's going to talk to him about his past, about having been a slave, and he's going to have a conversation about that, and then people are going to play the game and be like, "Oh, I knew they'd force this like wokeness in," and you're like, "But he probably was a slave at least at the beginning."
Oh God, yeah.
Before he got to Japan, and like this is a period where the slave trade is like starting out to be in full swing, and I don't know.
That's already happened. That's already come up.
Of course it has.
Because there was I can't remember what it was. I think it was some sort of blurb. Like there was some sort of promotional material, talking about like the premise of the game and stuff. And I can't remember the exact wording, but they said something like Yasuke is going to play a role in liberating the country from its oppressors. And I think most people who actually know the series know that what they're likely referring to is probably the Templars or the Templar equivalents that are in this game. It's not going to be like strictly like the oppressor as we know them, you know?
Oh, yeah, I
I think
sincerely doubt
people
it's going to be like the white Europeans are the oppressors. Like, no, because Japan was never colonized, so no.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think that's what people are jumping on. Like that's what they think that meant. And so of course they're jumping to conclusions like you just said. They're like, "Oh, here we go, the woke shit. You know, got to throw in the woke ideology and stuff." It's like, "No, this is no different from like any other Assassin's Creed game."
Well, I mean, my personal theory for like one of the anti, like if Nobunaga himself isn't a Templar, I think one of the people they're going to say is a Templar is Tokugawa Ieyasu,
Hmm.
who was an incredibly conniving, like manipulative little bastard, and like who would ultimately end up as the supreme ruler of Japan and forge the Tokugawa shogunate, which would last all the way up until the Meiji Restoration in the 1800s.
Yeah.
Um, but like I feel like, and also who Toranaga and Shogun is based on. I have a feeling that's the guy they're gonna be like, yeah, he's the head Templar in you don't know it, but he's the head Templar in this game.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if at least one of the villains in this game is probably a Portuguese guy. Like there's probably going to be
Oh,
but
there will be
probably
one, yeah.
yeah, yeah, probably somebody associated with the church. He'll probably be like a some sort of religious leader or priest or something.
Well, it
Who
could even
will
be
end up
Alessandro
being
Valignone.
it could be. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that would obviously tie in very closely with Yasuke and his history, right?
Yeah, Valignano. Sorry, I keep on getting his name wrong. Yeah, Valignano. But like, yeah, that would have then time with Yasuke would make sense in terms of like just like proximity and not having
Yeah.
contrivances in your story. Because remember when we cared about just like the craft of storytelling rather than like all this fucking culture war shit. Remember when we talked? Remember when we got to talk as critics about things like contrivance and plot holes and logical consistency and characterization and like visual metaphor and camera work and all the beautiful things that go into making stuff like this. And now we have
Yeah.
to talk about like what the fucking 4chan and 8chan people are whining about. I just,
Yeah.
what are
And
we doing?
and at the end of the day, I just you know, I could be proven wrong. There's always a chance of it when I, if I play the game at some point. But um, I just, I don't, based on everything that we've seen and heard about this game, I don't feel like this is deviating from what we've really gotten in the series thus far. I mean, yes, we have gotten games where the like main character or the one character in the game that you're playing as is a native, is a local of the culture you're playing that you're playing in. But we do have a Japanese character in this game. I mean, really we cannot stress that enough because apparently it's something that people easily forget. I'm not sure why. There is a playable Japanese character in this game. We've also had games where you play as a foreigner uh, who is not native to this culture. And we have throughout the series been in a situation where you are trying to fight against an oppressive regime that is secretly being controlled by the Templars. This is nothing new. Uh,
Well, you know what's particularly
Same-sex
bananas to me?
relationships, like optional same-sex relationships, are not new as far as the recent games are concerned.
Oh yeah,
These are
but
not new things.
before we get to the homosexuality discussion, because I think that deserves like its own like sort of focus. I
Yeah,
just the part of the reason this all really irritates me as a discussion is just there is so much to talk about in terms of like why Ubisoft deserve a ripe for criticism. Like their game design is outdated, the engine is shit, the writing of the way they do quests is bad, like all this stuff we kind of touched on before.
yeah,
And then and then you talk about like how the industry's functioning right now, and like it's like an extinction level event for game designers. Like everyone's being fired left, right, and center, so that, like CEOs can carry on pocketing increasingly insane high percentages of the profit margins
yeah,
for no reason.
yeah,
Baldur's Gate 3 swept the BAFTAs and the Game Awards, and then the entire team got laid off. It was
yeah,
just mad.
yeah,
It's so insane. And rather than talk about the industry problems and why games or indeed movies or TV shows, pop media, like I should stress, pop media, TV shows and films and pop media games,
right.
why they're going downhill, why people are just like why they're failing, because there are real reasons that we can talk about. but they're all to do with just how the industry works, and nothing to do with the idea of having a black character in a game. And
Yeah.
nothing makes these CEOs happier than hearing the whining about Yasuke, because it means that they're guaranteed that 50% of the population of the gaming population will then buy the game just for identity politics, to show their loyalty, to show that they're not evil bastards. So
Yeah.
great profit for them, but also it means no one talks about how unethical they are, or how
Yeah.
unimaginative and they are, or the complete lack of innovation in the industry.
Yeah. Like it is frustrating that people are not like talking about the things that I think should be talked about. This, it's funny. Now that we're talking about Ubisoft, the same sort of conversation happened a few months back with some of the reveal like trailers and information that they did for Star Wars Outlaws, where
Oh god, yeah.
again it's another one of those stupid she looks manly discussions or whatever the fuck. But again, like in that same week they released like all the ridiculous pricing models for the game, where there's like a $250 version of the fucking game or something. Like it's
Yeah,
just absurd. Like
microtransactions and loot boxes and
yeah,
just
yeah. Day one DLC, like 5 different versions of the game that you need a fucking spreadsheet to decipher. And like nobody was talking about that shit. Like everybody was talking about like, her, the main
and
character.
you just know that the game's going to be released broken, because they all are now. Like they're all released like half finished, and then like patched over the years, if they even bother to patch it at all. Like I mean, Assassin's Creed again has been particularly famous for this. Like the Unity, like your literal icon right now is like one of the most famous Unity glitches.
Oh
Um,
yeah, yeah. I had to put that there.
yeah, that these games are just, again, because and a good reason for that is like that these games are not given the right amount of time or the right amount of workforce needed to complete them on time. That these poor developers are just like brutalized.
Hmm.
These programmers are brutalized to get a product out on time that's just broken and unplayable, and then they get blamed for that.
Yeah,
And I'd rather just we lived in a world where people didn't pre-order games for $150 and then get a half broken mess on release, and we just actually funded game developers that acted ethically, and that we were more responsible as consumers and better as individual critics, and didn't have to distract ourselves with this complete nonsense every 5 minutes. Like,
yeah.
I'm just curious as to where this is going to go. Like, are we going to get like an Assassin's Creed set in Roman Britain, where like people start whining about black Roman soldiers on Hadrian's Wall that we know were there? Like, why do you give a shit? Why is
Yeah.
this the thing you've chosen to care about?
Yeah. I don't know. I have no idea. There's actually there's one comment that Silent Sam brought up. Did you guys ever touch on Yasuke being the first playable historical figure? Barring Leonidas being briefly playable in Odyssey, from what I understand. I'm just curious about your thoughts on that. Um, I don't. We didn't really touch on it that much, but I don't really have a problem with it. I mean, I feel like you have just enough wiggle room. I think there's just enough room to tell an engaging story when it comes to someone like Yasuke. I feel like if you had a character or a historical figure that we have a ton of information on, like somebody who we practically know like most of the major events that happened in their life, I think it might be strange to have a playable character like that. Like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of like an example.
Well, I mean, like if you played as
Uh,
like Richard the Lionheart, that would be very strange in an Assassin's Creed game, because you
exactly,
know what
yeah,
he was
yeah.
doing.
Yeah, like he's too big. Like when you have somebody that's that big, you can't really like play as them. But I feel like Yasuke is he's low level enough while still being involved in important events during that time, that you can tell an engaging story and have wiggle room to be creative. So
Oh
I
yeah,
don't
I
know.
mean that's the thing. It's just, if you're going to pick a historical figure, the reason you don't tend to pick historical figures is because you just don't want to restrict yourself, right? It's not any kind of like ethical concern. It's just we don't want to pick people whose lives are too well known about, because that restricts what we can do with them if we're trying to maintain some semblance of historical accuracy,
Yeah,
even if it's just like a cursory one. So,
yeah,
but if you get a character like Yasuke, where like we know, like he's really interesting and we know very specific, interesting things about him, but actually a lot of his history during a very interesting time period in which he was heavily involved is actually a bit of a mystery to history.
yeah,
That's ripe for exploration.
yeah,
In the same way that if we were to do, I'm just trying to think of another example you could do. Like if we were going to do again a game set in, you know, the Roman occupied North Britain, and we did like the loss of the Ninth Legion in Scotland.
yeah,
We have historical records about like some of the centurions and what their names were, but beyond that we know nothing about them. And if that was one of the playable characters, that'd be kind of interesting. um
yeah, yeah. And there's it's funny to think about, but uh, an argument could be made that he actually gets a leg up over most of the other protagonists in the series. in the sense that like there is more historical basis for him than there is compared to the others. I mean, when you think about it, you're often playing as a completely original protagonist who is coming into contact with very influential or renowned or infamous historical figures. You know, you have like Edward Kenway like rubbing shoulders with the likes of Blackbeard and stuff. You have Ezio palling around with
Like Machiavelli and the Borgias
yeah,
and
Da
Patsies and
Vinci
yeah,
and all that.
Da
Yeah,
Vinci.
yeah. And these are just complete nobodies. They're original characters that Ubisoft came up with. Whereas like Yasuke, like there at least is some basis for him, you know?
Well, with Ezio, it's even hard. Like the thing is, like as much as I love Ezio and I do like him as a character, if
Yeah.
anything, he's actually a kind of too like it's almost impossible to believe that he wouldn't be historically recorded. Like Cesare Borgia brought his entire army out to besiege Monteriggioni and blow it apart with cannon. You're telling me no one
Right.
recorded this? Like
Yeah.
what?
It's like I
Like
don't
Ezio
believe you.
Auditore, yeah, is a Florentine nobleman. Like you're telling me his family have no records about them, and even if it was like systematically destroyed, like you're telling me that the public hangings of his entire family weren't even like vaguely recorded.
No, apparently not. That was a footnote next to the hanging of God, what was his name? One of the Pazzi,
Patsy,
the Pazzi. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. It's like that was no. Everyone just forgot about Ezio's family dying after that happened.
yeah,
Apparently.
like Ezio, like, it's very strange. Or the fact that in that thing that like Rodrigo Borgia gets killed because Cesare makes him eat a poisoned apple,
Oh yeah,
rather than dying of probably malaria as he actually did in real life, like some kind of
yeah.
disease. um, which you'd think people would have noted because actually like a big problem that Cesare had at the time historically was that like he couldn't hold on to the power like all his power was tied up in his father being the pope and he didn't have time to affect like a good transition where he could secure his own power because he
Mm.
himself was ill at the same time and like out of commission for like 6 months. um like it's just and again historical accuracy doesn't necessarily matter here. I'm just pointing it out that like if people are going to say that Yasuke being a historically real person somehow shortchanges what's possible with him, I'm like no it doesn't. At least it hasn't seemed to restrict any of the fictional characters from doing stuff that really should have been historically changing and recorded. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I just exactly. I just don't buy into the argument. To most of the arguments that are being made when it comes to this. Because there's just so many there's so many counters to every single argument. Uh, the historical element, the fact that in past games in the series it hasn't been done this way. Yes, it has. Um, you know, the fact that even if it hadn't been done this way, I mean, you there's an argument to be made that you could start doing it. I mean, why not? You know, like I don't know.
absolutely.
There's just layers upon layers to this, and I don't know. I don't get this one, and I'm surprised by uh the amount of pushback that you're getting from like others on this. I don't know.
Yeah, especially the further back in time you go, right? When because obviously the further back in history you go, the less reliable records tend to be, and the less we have records at all. Um, the good example would be like AC Valhalla. Ivor pals around with like or like meets the children of Ragnar Lothbrok, who might not even have been a real person.
Yeah,
Like he's at very best like he's like quasi mythical. Like he might have been real. Certainly, we have more reliable records for people who are claimed to be his children, like oh what the hell's he called? Thingy Snake Legs. Uh
Ivar the Boneless.
yeah, Ivor
Uh,
the Boneless and people like that, who were theoretically Ragnar's children, and we have records of them. So
yeah,
Ragnar probably was real to a certain degree. But beyond that, like or if we go back to like I don't know, Alexander the Great, like if we did a Assassin's Creed game set in Alexander the Great, I mean, actually I said that, I'm pretty sure in canon he was assassinated by an assassin, right? um,
oh yeah, yeah.
but
Oh, that's right. Yeah, Bayek's wife. I forget her name.
no,
Aya.
before
I
that,
think
because
Aya.
no, Aya kills helps kill
Oh,
Brutus kill
Caesar.
Caesar, but
Caesar. Yeah, she kills Caesar. Sorry.
when you go to the statues of all the assassins underneath Monteriggioni, I'm pretty sure that's one who's like she killed Alexander the Great with with like a crossbow or like some point a poisoned knife or something like that.
Yeah.
So because the sword he wielded is apparently one of the items of Eden, pieces of Eden.
Of course it is. All the items of Eden. Yeah. Well, that's it. Oh, God, yeah, and that's without even getting into the fucking supernatural shit. Like all of that
Yeah,
element is a whole nother layer to it. It's like, oh yeah, what a historical, what a historically
yeah,
accurate game where you have like precursor weaponry like being waged in historical time periods. Like, all right.
Yeah, Black Bart Roberts the Sage and Ezio the Psychic. It's just with his eagle
Well,
vision, and you're just like, I'm sorry, why are we giving a shit now about historical accuracy? It's very strange.
well, yeah, and weren't there there have been a bunch of historical characters throughout the series who have been members of the Assassin Brotherhood as well, haven't they?
Machiavelli, yeah,
Yeah, Machiavelli, Mary Read in the pirate timeline.
Mary Reed, yeah,
There's a few others. I can't remember all of them right now, but it's like, yeah, yeah, they were all part of a shadowy order of
Pythagoras
assassins.
technically,
Yeah, Pythagoras,
uh,
yeah.
like Cleopatra for a little bit, like a bunch of the people you meet in Valhalla are all involved, like Alfred the Great as a Templar,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah, yeah. Oh
it's
God,
just
yeah, I forgot
like
about that one. Yeah.
Charles Lee as a Templar, like
Yes.
Benjamin Benedict Arnold as a Templar. Like there's just a bunch of crazy shit going on.
Uh, yeah, it's just silly.
Good old King Washington.
King Washington, the tyrant. Yeah,
Uh,
well, once he got that apple of Eden, I just, George Washington, he just,
yeah,
just went down the.
Darwin having you murder some of his like ideological rivals.
Da Vinci was an assassin helper. Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
Yeah.
he helped the Brotherhood.
Um, I guess actually with Da Vinci, I think this is an interesting point to get onto this, right? Because obviously in the game series, they very strongly imply that Da Vinci is gay, and in real life, he was probably bisexual.
Yeah.
Um, and obviously part of the griftosphere pushback to Yasuke and indeed just the game in general, Assassin's Creed Shadows, is like, oh, not only is he black, not only is it a whammon, but like you can make him gay because you can have homosexual relationships in this game. And again, I just sit there being like, so you know nothing about homosexuality's history in Japan, do you? Okay.
No. And I mean, there's so many historical bases for it, like many of them. But I'm more coming at it from the standpoint, especially now that it's been done like several times with the recent titles. It's been done ever since Odyssey. Odyssey was the first one to do it. Odyssey did it, Valhalla did it, and now this one's doing it. Where your character or the characters that you're playing as, I suppose, have enough wiggle room where they want to incorporate RPG elements like having a love interest and everything. Like a lot of the Assassin's Creed games recently have become more like action RPGs rather than like kind of the action stealth game uh, that it used to be when it first started. So they will incorporate certain elements like, you can form all these relationships with various characters. And you can form a romance with certain characters. And, as an element of that, you can have a same-sex romance as well. That's just one element that they've been doing. So I'm more just like confused that now people are like, oh, he's gay. It's like, well, I mean, they did the same thing
Yeah,
in the last two games.
gay people have existed for a while, guys. I hate to break this to you.
Yeah, yeah. Like
I,
again, like
I,
this
I,
is nothing new.
well, I guess again, in the kind of same way I was to talk about the race stuff, like it's interesting on two levels, right? The first is like the attempted appeal to historical accuracy to say why you can't do this, and people seem to forget that just like you know homosexuality being like a taboo thing or being like something illegal or looked down on is a relatively recent phenomenon historically, at least to the kind of extent that it currently is or was and is unfortunately regressing back to in some places.
Yeah.
But like particularly in ancient history, like homosexuality and queerness were like people didn't have the same conceptions of gender and sex back then that we do now.
Hmm.
Um, I joked with you about the stream before the stream started about like how Caesar had a gay relationship with the king of Armenia, and like in ancient Rome at the time, his political rivals criticized him not for having a gay relationship, but for being the bottom in that relationship because they're like, oh yeah, it's fine to have sex with a man, but like you're Roman, you should be the dominant partner. You can't be submissive to a foreign king.
You weren't gay
Um,
enough.
yeah, you were not the king gay. That is our
You were
problem. It's like
you were not the king gay.
you were not the
Oh,
supreme commander gay.
oh, and there you go. By the way, Sheev Talks is in the chat. He said, "Of course, I
Yeah, I
came here
saw.
and see Jolly talking about history of homosexuality in Japan." Of
It's
course,
an interesting topic. I'm not going to apologize for this. It's interesting, and also I didn't bring this up. The grift has brought this up, so bite me.
exactly. Well, and another thing that I think should be stressed is that it's going to be optional. Like it was optional in the last two games, and I have to imagine it's going to be optional here. You're not going to be forced into these relationships. I can't
But even
imagine
if
that
you
you're
were,
going
who
to.
cares?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But
Like,
I'm just saying, like, if these people have such a problem with it, you don't have to do it. You don't.
yeah, it's almost that thing. It is almost certainly going to be an RPG element and therefore optional. As Silent Sam's pointed out, like in Odyssey, whether you were Cassandra or Alexios, you could choose either kind of romantic relationship with with either sex, and it's only in the DLC that they're like, no, Cassandra is straight, and you're like, oh, okay, that's
Well,
kind of a
yeah,
backward step there for
yeah,
Cassandra.
yeah. They kind of messed it up when it came to the DLC, and there was a lot of criticism about that, where it kind of boxed you into this relationship that you had to do, like you had no choice, and it
Yeah.
was completely unnecessary because a while back, I mean, they did away with the element of uh, you have to play as somebody who is a direct ancestor to like the present day character. Well, ever since Miles died in Assassin's Creed 3, that went right out the window. So you don't have to like she the point is Cassandra did not need to have descendants because
Uh, again, this may maybe my ignorance of the franchise, but did they jettison that? Because I thought the whole like Layla character was like, no, her ancestor was an assassin.
no,
Like
oh,
her
well,
ancestor is
her
Ivor.
her ancestor may as well like could very well have had an assassin ancestor, but it was not Cassandra. Like
Oh, okay.
I'm almost certain that it was not Cassandra. It was not Alexios. Um, the way that they were able to put her in the Animus to experience Cassandra or Alexios's memories is because they found the spear. I guess the spear had like their genetic material in it or something. It's some weird
Their
bullshit. It's
blood
a
on it.
weird
Or,
explanation.
yeah,
Yeah, but the spear of Leonidas is how they were able to
I've always
use
wondered
the
about that tech,
Animus.
right? Because I know it's a hand wave to be like, this is how you get to experience. It is just like this is the rule. Like we have their DNA, you can view their memories. And I'm like,
Yeah,
does that mean you can only view their memories up until the point that they left that DNA, right? Like, so if you find
yeah,
that their blood they shed when they were 23, then surely you only get their memories up till 23.
yeah. Well, yeah, well, and exactly. Gropey Alive or Groppy Alive. I don't know how to pronounce your name. I'm sorry. Uh, yeah, Cassandra had some random descendant that hasn't been relevant to the story ever. Yeah, pretty much
It
because
was Sean Hastings.
it could be. Hey, for all we know, maybe. But yeah, the fact that they have Cassandra take the staff, which allows her to live for centuries, it makes the whole thing irrelevant. I don't know why they like boxed her into this relationship in which she had to have a child. Doesn't make any sense. But
Yeah, and
I
then
don't
there's
know.
the whole sage mechanic as well. It's like, oh, some people have like clones of like the Forerunners, and Ivor, like Ivor's Odin, right? Like,
It's
and
yeah, yeah. A lot of the lore
Bassine's
with the
Loki,
series, it's just oh, it's such a mind fuck. Yeah,
and then and then they have like, oh, Juno's back, but then she kind of disappears between games, and they explained it in a comic or something, and you're like, oh, okay, whatever.
yeah.
Okay. Followers of Konsu and all this nonsense. Just what I care so little about the precursor stuff. I think everyone's just given up. The modern day and the precursor stuff, no one cares about.
Nobody gives
It
a
just
shit.
exists
Yeah,
to be
yeah.
the just exists to be like the excuse to go back in time, which I don't think we need. But anyway, but actually,
It's
like
the
to
kind of
link
thing where
Odyssey
like,
to
oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, after you.
I was just gonna say like it's just it seems like the obligatory thing that uh ever since they started doing it, it's like they feel like they can't stop. It's like they have to continue that storyline. I don't know. It's
Yeah, just
weird.
just do a soft reboot, guys. That's all you need to
Yeah,
do.
all anybody cares about is like the actual historical periods anyway. So fuck it.
Yeah, and honestly, it's become so the laws become so convoluted and contradictory right now that like a soft reboot would actually be the best thing. I think.
Yeah.
Because
Actually have not read any of the novels, but I know that there's like a bunch of contradictions in those. Like I know that Edward Kenway, like that book, I forget what the name of it was. It Assassin's Creed Forsaken or something? I can't remember the name of the novel. It's the one where Edward dies, and you find out the whole
he gets
backstory behind Hatham and
gets
everything.
killed in a house attack, right?
Yeah, yeah, he gets the Templars or somebody hired by the Templars invade his house and they kill him. And but yeah, he had like dark hair in that, whereas like he later ended up getting blonde hair in Assassin's Creed 4. So but I don't know. There's just a bunch of like weird little contradictions in there from what I remember.
He started dyeing his hair in later life.
Yeah, just for the hell of it, you know.
Just a bunch of strangeness. But anyway, it's just to link the Odyssey stuff and the homosexuality discussion back to Shadows. It's kind of
Yeah.
interesting, right? Because again, like in ancient Greece, obviously we have like the poet Sappho who was a lesbian, and like homosexual relationships were very common, particularly amongst like older men and younger men in terms of like a mentor-mentee relationship in ancient Greece.
Mm.
And what's interesting is like that's almost essentially the same system that they had in 1581 period of Japan, right? It's like you had this thing called Nanshoku, which was a kind of mentor-mentee homosexual relationship that started in Buddhist and Shinto, Buddhist monasteries and Shinto religion, way back in the early period of Japan. And
Yeah.
then because most of the samurai were sort of like were Buddhist, were Buddhism and samurai warrior culture were like very close, and Bushido were very closely linked together. A lot of these samurai started taking on similar relationships. Like you'd have a young mentee who I'm trying to remember the name of that. What's it called? Wakashido, I think is the name of that relationship.
I don't know.
Where again it was like older man and younger warrior have a mentor-mentee relationship that is also a very exclusive homosexual relationship. And then
Mm.
when their apprenticeship quote unquote ends, you can seek a similar arrangement either with your peers or with a new mentor or mentee. And the exclusivity only applies to same-sex relationships. Like you could carry on having sex with women during that relationship. But like yeah, like the point being that because it's a warrior-based thing, and because Yasuke is in the warrior class, um, the idea that he could have Wakashido style relationships is totally legitimate to the time period. In fact, given that he's an object of fascination historically for people at the time, being a 6'2", massively hench black guy,
Yeah.
I imagine he would get no shortage of offers.
Yeah. Yeah, and he gained like renown, and he was like in service to a very influential like
A
lord and
very
everything.
powerful and influential warlord, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't
And in,
know. I
and in
just
fact,
the
one of the sorry, just round that off. One of the
yeah, yeah, yeah.
people, because I was like Yasuke and helped Nobunaga commit seppuku, and the only other person who was present was a guy called sorry, give me a moment to check for his name because I can never remember it off the top of my head. Ranmura,
Mm,
Mori Ranmura. Ranmura was Nobunaga's male lover. Um,
mm.
so like the
Oh,
idea that we can't have gay people in this setting is completely insane.
yeah. It's like it's not possible. It's like, oh, really? Okay. Yeah, like there's more than enough wiggle room. There's the historical basis, there's the fact that, we've had it in several games. There's the fact that it's optional. You're probably not going to have to do it. Or if you want to, you can. Um, so I just, I don't know. I don't
And then there's
why.
also just the fact of who cares? Like, why does it matter if
Yeah,
even if it was the case that like homosexuality was totally taboo in Japan, and like and you were killed if you were found out, like there would still have been gay people alive at the time, A, but also B, like in the modern period where we've come to realize that repressing gay people is a bad thing. Why do you care that they have a gay
yeah.
relation? Unless it's just you have a problem with gay people, which let's be honest is what that is.
Well,
Why do you care?
and the thing that's always been interesting when it comes to the Assassin's Creed series, even though we don't know yet if Yasuke is going to become an official member of like the Assassin Order or anything like that, but he might be like adjacent to that order. He might be working with them, something like that. And when it comes to that order, it seems like they operate in such a way that many other like organizations do not operate. Like they are this almost worldwide organization uh, that has like multicultural members from all across the world all working together towards this one shared goal. I mean, similarly to the Templars are kind of like the opposite coin of that, where they're a similar thing. They're like a worldwide conglomerate, like a shadowy organization of people all working towards the same goal. And that's not something that you would like really get in a lot of these historical time periods. It's very much like something that was invented for this series. But my point is that like when you have an organization like that, it's very easy to take like whatever liberties you want to when it comes to interpersonal relationships. Just by the very fact that you have like all these people from all these different cultures, putting aside all of their different like all of their differences to work together towards something like that in itself
Absolutely.
like leaves you like more wiggle room to do that kind of stuff as well.
And like building off the back of that in terms of like what the Templars and the Assassins. I mean, we slightly touched on this with the whole Assassins philosophy of liberty thing, because
Yeah,
the central dichotomy of these games is like the Templars want to be like an oppressive force that comes in and like takes over and becomes an authoritarian regime versus
yeah,
the Assassins who think it's all about individual liberty. The nature of this entire game series is essentially just a discussion around things like exploitation and versus authority, and the limits of freedom, and cultures versus like cultural different diversity versus cultural monoliths and stuff like that. So I
Yeah.
find it very strange when you set your game in a time period or a place that would naturally feed into that, like the slave trade in the Caribbean, or like, let's say they go to like colonial India in the future, or like right now in AC Shadows when they have the European influx into Japan. And
Mm.
then people go like, oh, they're just talking about like diversity and wokeness. They're like, but the entire premise of the game series is talking about this battle. So of course we're going to pick time periods that are historically interesting because they're a clash of cultures or a clash of ideologies, but also B, that are around the central premise of exploitation and control and colonialism and authoritarianism.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and that's actually a good point. I remember Freedom Cry, which was, kind of almost a miniature game in and of itself. I mean, it was a DLC, but
That's
where you're
Adewale's one, right?
Adewale, yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, that was like the literal, like you said, that's like the literal incarnation of that. I mean, it's literal slavery in the Caribbean. Uh, I believe that was the Portuguese. Now, obviously, the main guy, the main villain in that DLC, if I remember correctly, was a Templar as well. But it's also just reflective of the actual type of slavery that was going on at the time. So, yeah, I don't know. It's I think it's like suitable. It's fitting.
I think an interesting thing to do, like if I was in charge of this game series, and they're like, where do you want to set the next game? I'm like, the Spanish conquest of the Aztec Empire would be a really
Oh,
interesting one
that
to
would
do.
be yeah.
Well, but the thing is, what I think would be really interesting about it is exploring like almost like the downsides of Assassin's Creed of Assassin's ideology of liberty, where you're like, oh, okay, so like the Aztecs are an incredibly authoritarian culture that like maybe the Templars turn up in the New World and with some of the conquistadors and they're like, oh, we're going to ally with Montezuma and the Aztec imperial line, and because like that centralized control is very much what we're about, and so like you battle against that and like help bring down the Aztec Empire, only to then unleash this wave of like exploitational colonialism where it's a free for all and there is no authority and people being murdered left, right, and center and casted off as slaves and exploited, and smallpox is running rampant. And you're like, oh, maybe we fucked up actually. Like,
Yeah, well, it's and doesn't those debates do come up a little bit in the series. Like I think between
yeah,
Hatham and
Shay has
Connor.
that.
Yeah, yeah, Shay has that. Hatham and Connor, I think, have that debate with each other where from Hatham's perspective, like the Templars represent order, whereas the assassins represent chaos. That's what they're both fighting for. Now, obviously, the assassins disagree and have a different perspective on it. But yeah, I mean, I guess there is an element of with freedom can potentially come chaos.
Or not even that, but just like authoritarianism bad, absolutely, but like if you are careless in how you go about dismantling it and just leave nothing to replace it, like you just leave a vacuum,
Yeah,
that's gonna just make things, because obviously the assassins don't want actual chaos, they want managed liberty basically.
yeah,
um
yeah, yeah. Why would they
but
want
like,
actual chaos?
yeah, exactly, but like the Templars can be like, oh, you took us down here and didn't replace us with anything, and like you just devolved into a shit show. um would be quite an interesting perspective. Like Shay kind of had that, right, when the assassins accidentally caused the Lisbon earthquake.
Yes,
um
yes, exactly.
and he's like, you guys were fucking around without ever understanding what you were fucking around with. And then of course, like
Yeah.
even in the modern day stuff, like Miles's dad, who's Desmond's dad rather, whose name I can never remember, Mr. Miles.
William
Mentor
Miles, I
Miles.
believe. William
William, yeah,
Miles.
he's taken
Yeah.
some incredibly unethical decisions throughout this franchise.
Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely.
um
Well, the
yeah, the
fact that
assassins
he's
have
using
not
his
always
own
been good
son, he's
guys.
using his own son as like a fucking guinea pig to like find all this stuff, and even when his son like kind of protests against it, he's like, "Oh, you're just a whiny," like I forget what he says, but he's
Yeah,
just like, you spoiled little brat" or something. It's like you're not the one who's
yeah,
like strapped down into this fucking chair all day.
well, yeah, and also his son like literally escaped from like a cult, right? It was like a compound. They were like, you grow up here and you're not allowed to see the outside world. You're gonna train to be an assassin. And you're gonna like while you're under my roof, we worship assassin ideology, young man. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah,
and then he's like, no,
exactly.
piss on that, and left. Yeah, no, the
Yep.
assassins, they've not always. And then it goes like they used to cut off people's fingers which by the way, that's a really, I like how Altair came in and was like, you know what, that's actually a bit of a giveaway that we're assassins if we're missing a ring finger. Maybe let's not
Yeah.
make ourselves so bloody obvious.
It's like let's not do that maybe. let's not.
I'll I'll tell you, yeah, the pragmatist being like, maybe let's not advertise our presence. Maybe that's really stupid, actually.
Yeah, yeah. Or maybe enough, and I'm sure enough people also probably complained and were like, I don't want to lose a finger. Can we do away with this, please? It's like,
Yeah.
fine.
And then Machiavelli came in and was like, okay, we're not going to remove your finger. We're just going to give you third degree burns on it instead.
Oh God, I forgot about that. I forget a lot. I forgot about like a lot of the early stuff that happened in the series. It's been so long since I played like AC1, AC2, all that stuff.
Did you ever, I think it's the Witcher 2 game where like you can find a dead body like in a hay bale and like underneath like a high wall, and it's just meant to be a piss take of like what would actually happen to you if you did a leap of faith from like 200 feet up in the air into a hay bale, just die,
Oh God, yeah. It's like you would hit your head on like the side of it and just like just get killed
just
immediately.
crumple. Yeah, just crumple and you just go through the cart and into the floor,
Yeah, yeah.
basically.
Like the hay wouldn't be enough to contain you. Oh God.
Oh god, yeah. This I guess again that kind of loops back around to the representation argument. Like we're not ragging against people who have genuine concerns about like real representation because those are
Yeah.
good things. Like you should demand, good representation. Actually, I think I was talking to Sheev talks about this when I made him watch the first episode of Rings of Power because I wanted to traumatize him for life.
Oh, that is so mean. That is mean.
I wasn't even like you're not. I was like, you're not going to enjoy this. This is going to be one of the worst things you've ever seen. But I'm just intrigued by your
You are not
reactions.
going to enjoy this. It's like
Just, just
something you tell to somebody before you're about to torture them. It's like,
yeah.
this is going to be painful.
I think it was the line where Galadriel's like, they're like, "Oh, our torches give like this place is so evil. Our torches give off no heat." And I just
No,
heard
no,
like this intake of yeah, sorry, sheep, this intake of breath
yeah, he's
from the other end of the mic, where he's like, "Oh my god," and then it's like, "Yeah, can I? Do you know why a rock sinks and a boat floats?"
oh God. That show's attempt to like be so like philosophical is just the cringiest shit.
Painful.
It's
But
so oh God.
sorry, the reason I bring this up is actually because like that is a great example of how to do representation badly and shallowly. Because
Yeah.
like, do you remember the discussion? People were like, "Oh my god, they've got like black Numenorians and black elves and black dwarves," and oh my god, woke cringe.
Hmm.
And I just sat there being like, but there's so much like this is Middle Earth is a big place, and like we have in the Haradrim and in the people from the Southlands and stuff like that, like we have characters of color, and like even if you want to have black elves or black dwarves, you can rewrite it to make that viable. But I
Yeah.
want to see those people treated with respect. I want to see, if I see a black person in a predominantly white culture in a medieval, technological period, I want that to be a person, not a cardboard cutout. And that means they're going to have their own histories and their own cultures and their own perspectives and their own, all these things that are brought to the table. Like if I went to 15th century Germany and found a black man wandering around, it's not because they were just black Germans. It's because he didn't just spawn into existence. It's
Yeah.
this guy came across either himself or his parents or his grandparents. Like they came across and they came from this place and they have this history and this culture and this outlook, and there's this whole world of detail around them and that integrates them into the larger world that is interesting to talk about and might provide new perspectives on things.
Well, and
And
that's exactly it. You want to make it feel like a world whenever you incorporate those elements. And the thing that's frustrating, like you said, with something like Rings of Power is that you already have foundations to be able to do that and make it in a way that like strengthens the world building and makes it feel more organic. Like you said, I mean, Harad, do you know how long I've been dying? Like, I have been dying for a series that is like set in Harad or like Kand or one of those like southern locations of Middle Earth. Like and a story from the perspective of those people. Like I want that so badly. But
oh
they
yeah,
still aren't doing it. They're just not doing it.
well, it's like one of my things. Like, if you were going to build like a big RPG Lord of the Rings game, which at some point, guys, please do. Just please build that game. I'll
Oh
play. Like,
yeah, yeah.
honestly, even if it's in the Ubisoft model, just like I want to be able to walk around that world. But I think
Yeah.
a really good place to start it wouldn't actually be in like Gondor and Rohan and Arnor or the Shire or any of those places. I think it'd be cool to start it off in the East where the Blue Wizards went.
Oh, that would
Um,
be great too. Yeah, like Rune.
let's
I think it's
yeah,
Rune.
yeah, Rune, and like let's talk about like the Easterlings and the Rune and the Haradrim, and like maybe you can go south and go to Harad and then go north and then into Gondor and
Yeah.
see everything's going like that could be really cool.
Yeah,
Can we
yeah, like
please
and
have this?
figure and understanding because I'm sure that obviously some of their leaders probably were evil and had like evil intentions, but a lot of the guys who were just like part of those factions, they might have had just like legitimate reasons, legitimate grievances with Gondor, over like previous land disputes or previous
Well, yeah,
grudges and things like
them and
that, you
Ubar,
know? Yeah,
them
Umbar,
and the
yeah,
people
yeah,
from
yeah.
Umbar. I've had some real historical shenanigans going on. Well, they kind of have that in the movie, right? When Faramir kills the Easterling,
He does mention
and
that. He
looks,
has a line. It's like,
yeah,
do you ever wonder where he came from and like what
yeah,
lies or
whether
threats pushed him here and things
yeah,
like
whether he
that.
was motivated by evil or was just mistaken and didn't know what was going on. And you're like, yeah, that's interesting.
I would love that. And it's one of the few post trilogy stories that I would actually want to explore. Would be like the continuing struggles between like the former allies of Sauron and
Oh yeah.
Gondor under Aragorn, you know.
No, no, you want to see a season two of Galadriel threatening Numenor with a war the elves can't possibly win.
Uh, no, you
That
know
was
what?
a
I think I'm good. I'm good.
that
I'm
was
good on that.
amazing. She never got to that point, but like it's just, that was the bit where I was like, this is a clown car of a series. Like when she gets rescued by the Numenorians, like from drowning after stepping into the middle of the ocean, thousands of miles away from land. Um, and then they bring her back to Numenor, and she's like starts threatening them with war to get them to join up against Sauron. And they're like, this is Numenor; they would crush you.
Yeah.
Like the armies of Numenor, I think if I remember the books correctly, it's like the armies of Numenor turned up and were like so powerful that like Sauron's entire army just ran away. And this is when
Yeah.
Sauron was like in full power.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
yeah, there's just
Uh,
man, Galadriel's a fucking idiot in that show.
I
Anyway,
don't. Yeah. Getting off topic, but yeah, I mean, it's the bottom line is, and we were talking about when it comes to something like Middle Earth, you have basis for that. When it comes to Assassin's Creed, I feel like the basis to have a story like this is already built in. Like I think it works
yeah,
for Yasuke, and I don't really
the
get
world is
why.
big. And
Yeah,
people traveled around. You know, people didn't just stay in, like even in the ancient world, people didn't just stay in their little places. Like people traveled, people went around, people met other people. This happened.
yeah,
You know, one of the things I often enjoy reminding people is that, you know, other than like having black legionaries in the from recruited from North Africa that are like in Hadrian's Wall, but it's like, you know, we've had black Roman emperors. Like Septimius
yeah,
Severus was a black man from Libya.
yeah,
Um, you know, like the idea that like all these ancient cultures, all these ancient places, all these like, or just anywhere really in the world that has any significant amount of like trade is going to be a cultural ethnic monolith. Like
yeah,
with Japan, it's actually really interesting, right? Like the reason Japan today is kind of an ethnic cultural monolith is because of this period, like in the 1500s, where like Europe was starting to come in and the Japanese got like really isolationist and like refused to have anything to do with the Europeans after a point. Like, you know, Tokugawa would go on to ban like Christianity in sorry, I was saying the 1920s, the 1620s,
yeah.
like or
The 1920s.
1610s,
Yeah,
in the 1610s, and like, you know, like all these things, like the sword hunts that Toyotomi Hideyoshi instituted, you know, all these incredibly restrictive measures, or like the invasions of Korea, all these things that make it so fascinating. But like by and large, places in the world are not cultural and ethnic monoliths. They just can't be because there's just no way.
yeah, they're not, and it would be boring, especially when you have historical basis for it. It would be boring, like, not to capitalize on that. I find worlds and settings in these stories a lot more fascinating when you have a variety of different cultures and peoples. I know it's obviously a different thing. It's fantasy, but that's one of the things I love about Lord of the Rings. And it's one of the things that I give like a leg up over, like a slight leg up over something like the Game of Thrones world, because you have not just different cultures, but also like different species and stuff. So it's just, I don't know, when you have, and it doesn't even necessarily need to be that, obviously. I mean, when you have a historical setting, you can obviously just have different cultures, different skin colors, different etc. It just makes the world feel more alive and bigger, and a lot more variety, especially when you have like different characters from these different cultures interacting with each other, putting aside their differences, learning about each other, to achieve a greater end. Um, Diversity and variety really kind of strengthens that element, I think,
Yeah,
and
like
makes it just
particularly
feel
in
a
a place
lot
like
more
Lord of the
meaningful.
Rings, particularly in a place like Lord of the Rings, where like the entire theme of, well, you know, one of the central themes, if not the central theme of the entire series, is like how, you know, good people band together in spite of their petty difference. You know, how these differences are ultimately very petty, and that we
Yeah,
band together to overcome great evil.
it's one thing I love about like the Mass Effect series as well, where you have
Just
all of
leave the
these
council. Just
different.
leave the council to die. Just-
Oh yeah. I saved the council. I just because I like the implications it has later on in the series.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like it's a similar thing where you have this greater threat that is a threat to all cultures and all species. And so it's all about like these different species coming together and putting aside their historical grievances and stuff um, to, in the case of that series, for the sake of survival. Um,
Yeah. I mean, Shogun did this, right? Like, one of the things I find, and actually, Star Trek and things like that do it as well. It's not even like, oh, your culture is bad and mine is better in this way, and like my culture has this flaw, it has these flaws, and your culture has these flaws, and we can learn to overcome these flaws together, which is a perfectly valid thing to do, by the way. But like, it's not even necessarily that. It's just you can get these stories where like cultures meet and they have like very different perspectives on the same thing, and neither one is right or wrong. They're just like they just lead you to very different modes of thought.
yeah,
Um, and that's fascinating. Like they have that in, yeah, like I said in Shogun, where like the Japanese attitudes to death is very different from the Western one at the time.
yeah, yep,
Like death isn't nearly as, and because Asia and Japan are much more collectivist in their sense of identity
hmm,
than Europe is historically,
yeah,
and so even things like how you say your name, because we've been saying all these Japanese names the whole like Oda Nobunaga and Toyotomi Hideyoshi and Tokugawa Ieyasu, and like one of the interesting things is your family name is said first. Like Ieyasu would be what we would call the first name of Tokugawa, but you wouldn't call him Ieyasu Tokugawa. You call him Tokugawa Ieyasu because the
yeah,
family comes first. That's the central bit of his identity.
yep,
Um, just little things like that, or how again in Shogun Mariko talks about like the Japanese have this thing about having three hearts, like your secret heart, your inner heart, your outer heart.
mm,
Um,
yep,
all these things like the attitude to suicide, the attitude, like these are all interesting things. And they're just it pains me that in art of all places, a place that is all a field of human being and craft that is all about exploring ideas and portraying things by analogies of other things and showing the relations between things and doing things by their comparisons to other things, that you have a certain subsection of people who just want to be like, no, I just want this like very arbitrarily chosen stringent set of parameters and it can't deviate from that, and if you do it's bad, and it's not even that I dislike it, I just refuse to engage with it. I don't want to think outside these boxes.
yeah, yeah. It's really unfortunate, and you know, the main thing for me is, if you're going to incorporate something like this, if you're going to incorporate a character like Yasuke um, into a historical period or something like this, you want to either have some sort of basis for it, or you want to like actually make it organic the way that you weave it in. And in this case, it seems like they're doing that. So I just don't really, diversity. I like diversity when it's done well, and I welcome it as much as you're able to incorporate it. I hate when it's done poorly, and I obviously wouldn't want a character like Yasuke to like overshadow the culture that he is, basically interacting with in the game. In this case, Japanese culture. But again, I just like we said earlier, I just don't see that happening. I don't see how he's going to like overshadow it. Um, so I just it it all makes sense to me. There is a historical basis for him, and he's probably not going to overshadow like the Japanese element of the game, especially when the other protagonist is Japanese. So it's just I don't know.
I guess
I got some people are
my
just never
question
going to
is,
change, I guess, when it comes to the whole culture war shit. It doesn't matter
yeah,
what
people are,
arguments you bring to them; they're not gonna have it.
well, they're not interested in changing their mind, right? They're not interested in a discussion. Like this is why the word debate has almost become like a toxic word on the internet. It's because no one who actually says they want to debate wants to debate. They just want to browbeat you until you accept their point of view. They're not
Yeah,
ever interested in actually considering yours or listening to yours.
yeah,
Uh, but like, I guess my question would be like, because the thing is, they make a pretense of doing this, right? They make a pretense of being like, oh, it's not that we're anti blah blah blah. It's just that we just they'd almost parrot what we've just said, like we just want it done right. And I'm like, I want you to tell me what you think being done right is, because every
yeah,
time I've seen you pick a battlefield, it's always been one where that argument makes no sense. And then
yeah,
they'll say something like, "Oh, I don't have a problem with women characters because I like Sarah Connor or I like Ellen Ripley." But then they'll look at like no Nawe and be like, "Oh, she's too butch," and I'm like, "But Sarah Connor in Terminator 2 isn't
yeah,
like."
yeah. That's a
Or
good point. That's a really good point. Yeah.
what's her name in Aliens? The Hispanic female Marine,
Oh, Vasquez.
Vasquez, yeah, like who is they even have that joke at the beginning, like, "Have you ever been mistaken for a man?" And she's like, "No, have you?" Like,
Have you?
she's
Yeah.
very like one of the boys and like butch and like non-traditionally feminine, and I don't see them having an issue with her. Probably because they learned to love that film before they became grifters. But
Yeah, that's definitely the case, I think, with some of those classic films that they will cite. And here's the thing, I mean, I will cite those films as being good examples of those things as well, but that doesn't mean that I'm just going to like turn my nose up of anything new that comes out, you know? I'm
yeah,
not just going to
absolutely.
automatically be like, oh, new Assassin's Creed game, that means Nawe must be butch. She must be a woke character. She must be whatever fucking buzzwords they're going to use.
Yeah, and like this is kind of. I almost, when I say I want to ask them this question, I almost want to ask them in a way that, like, 'cause obviously they're not going to change, but it's all the people who listen to them and take them like sort of semi seriously or even just totally seriously, and I want to try and like encourage. I know this is a losing battle, but I want to encourage a kind of state of discourse on at least on YouTube in terms of film criticism and game criticism, where the audience at least maybe takes a moment to be like, does do the things the people I follow say actually match up with their stated beliefs, or are they just using those beliefs as a shield for some very unpleasant lines of thinking that don't make any sense?
Yeah.
I just want again some level of increase. We briefly alluded to this when we talked about how even talking about this means that we're not talking about things like the incredibly exploitative business practices of gaming companies like Ubisoft. Like the fact that we could be having much more interesting discussions or much more pertinent discussions, the fact that we could actually be having discussions that lead to better games or better movies or better TV, and we can't have them because some people just want to say that being bad is being like the political thing they don't like. Or just saying a thing is political, quote unquote, to make it sound bad. Like, oh, being gay is political messaging. It's like, oh no, it's just a fact of
Yeah.
existence, actually. And
Yeah.
I don't know, it's a huge
Well,
distraction and it just
the
brings it
argument
bogs everything down.
I also find the argument that it's like, oh, they did this because they want to raise their ESG score, whatever the fuck that means, or they're doing it for DEI purposes and everything like that. I mean, don't you find that a little bit odd if that was the motivation, considering that like this is a game that takes place in Japan? It's not like this is a game that takes place like in England or something. So like by their definition of like what constitutes DEI, wouldn't like an Asian like culture or something like that it's a non-white culture, I guess is my point. So it's like
Yeah.
you're from their perspective, it's like you're supplanting one non-white culture in favor of another non-white culture. How would that be in the service of DEI? I don't get that.
Who knows? It's just arbitrarily picked to be a talking point, I guess.
Yeah. Oh God. It's just yeah.
And also,
Uh,
like, I just find it funny that these people seriously think that people like Bob Iger are woke. The people who own Microsoft or Ubisoft or Disney or like these crusty white cis businessmen like sit down at a table somewhere, and go like, yes, I really care about the plight of black people in America. Let's talk more about that, rather than just going, what can we do to make as much money as possible in the next quarter? What element of the zeitgeist can we exploit?
yeah. She's coming. Oh,
Yeah.
it's funny. Can't believe in 16th century Japan was so woke that they let a black person be a
Well,
samurai.
again, I've sort of seen that joke where like a Japanese historian was like, are they seriously accusing Oda Nobunaga of being the first proponent of DII initiatives?
He started it. He was the one who
He's like,
started the game.
oh that Nobunaga, God, he was woke. That brutal warlord who killed
Yeah.
thousands.
God, yeah. That's just too funny. I mean, it's funny, but it also I can't help but laugh at the whole thing. And
Well,
honestly,
that's
I
the kind of
don't.
thing, right? It's so patently ridiculous that I almost don't like. I get they're grifting. I get that for them it is just a money thing. But like anyone watching that, like, how do you not pick up on how like obviously transparently insane this is?
Yeah, I mean, because the thing is, even I probably still wouldn't agree with it for the reasons that we talked about. But let's say that Nawe wasn't in the game. Let's say that you could only play as him. I would at least understand it on some level. Like I would understand it on some level, but like the thing that you cannot ignore, like the last position that you cannot get around is the fact that there is a Japanese protagonist in the game. There is one. There is one. I
I
know
wonder if
nobody
it's going
likes
to
to
go back.
talk about her for whatever fucking reason. There's no discourse about that character, but she is
Well, you
on the
say,
box art. She is a character you can play
you
as.
say that I looked on the cover and I couldn't see her, so I guess she's just
Oh,
that sneaky, just that stealthy.
sneaky, spooky. Yeah, where'd she
I,
go?
j- I wonder if they're going to do this retroactively. Like they're going to go back to like Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice, and be like, oh, it's so woke that this guy is a disabled samurai character because he's missing an arm, or they're just like, they're going to go back
Well,
to just any
you know
any of
what's
this. Just it's just I don't know.
you know what's funny? I have seen a little bit of like historical revisionism when it comes to past games in the series. What's weird, I saw like one or two people the other day. They were talking about how like Assassin's Creed Unity is like a great game in the series or something. I was
What?
like, yeah, yeah, exactly. It
That
blew
thing's
my
a
mind when I
ugly
saw it. I
mess.
was like, yeah, that game was a fucking mess. And even after they fixed it with like subsequent patches, it was like okay. Like once they fixed it, it was fine. Like nothing amazing, nothing to write home about, but it was fine.
It was
But
incredibly
now all
forgettable.
of us, I was just gonna say like now it's like oh yeah, Assassin's Creed Unity is a hallmark of the series. It's like get the fuck out of here. You're full of shit.
Literally the only memory I have of Unity, other than the incredible bugs that made Napoleon's face a patchwork of horrors, um,
Mm. Well,
was
yeah, let's see
like
you no
my
further than my profile pic.
yeah was my frustration with Arno as a character, where like he was like Elise was constantly like being really foul to him the whole way through the game, and he just wouldn't stick up for himself. And then like
Yeah.
finally, like two-thirds of the way into the game, like after she's treated him like crap and he's lost everything, she like turns up to ask him for more help, and he's just like, "Oh fuck you," like, and finally stands up for himself. And I was like, I remember like clapping, like, "Oh my god, thank God he finally showed some backbone," because
Yeah.
just Elise is terrible.
Yeah. Ah.
And that's literally it, because Unity had like, oh, didn't they say anything like Arno's dad was killed by Shay, like, or some
Yes, yes.
incredible craziness?
Yeah, yeah. Shay ends up you don't really find out until you play Rogue, but yeah, he ends up killing Shay's dad at the end of that game.
Oh dear.
Yeah. Oh,
Just
but yeah, I don't know.
again,
I don't know how well this game is going to sell. You know, I obviously don't have a crystal ball. I don't know how successful the game is going to be, but I honestly don't think that this is really. I think this is going to be a controversy that's just going to come and go. You know, like it's nobody's going to give a shit when the game comes out about like
well,
talking about
I
this
imagine
anymore.
it's almost I imagine it's almost gonna be like a Doctor Who esque scenario, right? Where like, because like from what I understand, pre-sales in Japan are doing really well
Yeah.
for Shadow, but in the West, who knows? I think just you've kind of seen it with like box offices right now. Like people just aren't buying media anymore, and like not because necessarily they're unengaged, but just because like we're all struggling right now. No one's got money. You have to be really careful about what you spend your hard-earned dollars on right now, and so Assassin's Creed as a franchise, I think, has burned so many people through just being generically shit for so long that I can't see Shadows getting a major uptick. But then what will happen is like these grifters will then use that major, the lack of major uptick to be like, see, diversity kills your games. I'm like, no,
Oh
actually,
yeah. Yeah,
it's the
yeah,
long
yeah.
history of incredibly bad, half-finished, capitalist-created slop that turned us all off that video game.
Well, yeah,
Actually,
that's the thing. I mean, you know, the Assassin's Creed series has already been kind of going down and floundering. Like, you know, Valhalla wasn't super popular. I know that some people liked Mirage because it kind of got back to like the roots of the series and everything, but I can't imagine that that game like sold extremely well or anything.
no, I
Because
didn't.
it was a little bit like niche, you know. And yeah, like the Assassin's Creed series has just been kind of going down the tubes for a while now, and will probably continue to do so. I don't really see that changing anytime soon. And you're right, people are just going to use that like that natural downturn as evidence, quote unquote, that it's just like, oh, see, this is what DEI does. Go woke, go broke, just destroys everything. It's like, no, no,
Well,
no.
they did that with Baldur's Gate, right? Because with Baldur's Gate, like, Baldur's Gate, critically a huge success, very popular, sold really well. But because the company's shareholders just wanted that extra bit of profit, they stacked the entire team, like we mentioned. And then people started being like, oh, you see, it's because they're so woke, all these gay relationships in the game, and like, oh, players don't want that. And you get like people like Heel versus Babyface crawling out of the woodwork to scream about fucking pronouns and, modern day California shit and other insane nonsense.
Well, yeah, and it's funny, like when it comes to you know, just to use an example, like the relationships. The problem I had with the relationships, both straight and gay, in Odyssey and Valhalla, is that they were paper thin as fuck. I don't give a
Yeah, you
shit
can't get
that
invested in them.
yeah, yeah, like the characters, like they would already, like 10 minutes after you meet them, they would already be like throwing themselves like at your feet. I was just like, this is just so weird. Like there's hardly any foundation for most of the characters. I mean, there are a couple uh like bigger characters that you can have like relationships with, but most of them are just like small side characters that you do like one side quest for, and then that's it. You just immediately start a romance, and then the romance is just over after like one quick cutscene, and then that's it. You move on. Like they are paper thin as hell, and you can't get, like you said, you can't get invested in any of the romances. Like that's the problem I have with that, not the fact that there are fucking gay romances.
Oh yeah, I was about to say like one of the best relationships I've ever had in gaming was like Garrus from Mass Effect.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
it's like not just
I-
gay, he's a lizard man, and like he's one of the best relationships because there's just so much work put into like making him like a believable like character and making that relationship feel real that you get really invested in him.
Wait,
Uh,
you couldn't have a gay relationship with him.
with
Are you thinking of
Garrus,
some? Are you
girls?
thinking? No, no, not Garrus. Yeah, you could only do that as femship. Are you thinking of somebody else? Are you thinking
Oh
of
well, I
maybe
mean
of
whatever. Like I
Jal
mean,
from
no,
Andromeda?
it's just like no, it's just I'm playing as femship, but like I'm a male player, so like
Oh, right, right, right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm still role playing as a character having a
Oh
relationship
yeah.
with a lizard
Oh,
man.
dude, me too. Yeah. When it comes to femship like romances, he was my favorite. Like, cause he's just
Yeah,
such a bro. He's just such a cool dude, and he's one of the guys that is like with your character throughout the whole series. In terms of like having your back and stuff. It's like of course I'm gonna like have a romance with him if I can. Um, and it's like it's very well informed, and there's like a lot of basis for it. Whereas like with a lot of the romances in Assassin's Creed, they're paper thin as fuck, and you can't really get invested. That's the main problem. Like as with a lot of things in the recent Assassin's Creed games, there's a lot of bloat to them. Like vast as an ocean, deep as a puddle is how people often describe a lot of the recent Assassin's Creeds. Um, and like that's like the main I think problem with the series, in addition to Ubisoft's like horrible practices. It's not the fact that we have Yasuke as a playable character. It's not the fact that we have gay romances. Like there are much, much, much like
deeper
bigger, like
issues.
actual problems. There are actual issues.
Yeah,
Ugh.
I just look forward to the because this. I mean, Sheaves in the chat, he'll know this. Like when the Acolyte comes out, I'm just anticipating because
Uh,
we've already seen it, right? It's like it's just so much crap.
well, but that's actually a good example because like there's certain elements of that show that those people are going to like talk about those things. They're going to be like, oh, girl bosses, boo. But meanwhile, like if that show ends up being like, let's just say that show ends up being terrible, there's going to be like actual story problems that I think are worth harping on, and like implications on the prequels and things like that. Like, who fucking cares if there's like non-white and like
Yeah,
female characters and stuff? That's all they're going to be
I,
harping on, though.
I will say, as an attempt to kind of remain slightly fair and balanced here, like it does happen the other way around. Like, and again, we've all experienced it in this community as well. Which, like, someone, like, you'll criticize a thing like Ahsoka for story reasons. You'll be like, this thing is just terribly written.
Yeah,
And then someone will be like, oh, you just don't like women, and you just sit there being like, okay, fuck it,
it's
sure.
like, yeah, yeah,
Uh,
sure, that's totally the reason. You know me better than I know myself. Thank you.
I, I guess I find it a kind of fascinating in a way because even though they're theoretically coming from the opposite angle as like grifters, it it is a kind of grift, right? Like it is just kind of like I'm not gonna. I don't want to. I don't really care about storytelling. I'm just gonna use. I'm gonna weaponize identity. Either make myself a quicker buck, or to just like dismiss out of hand anything I don't want to have to think about.
Yeah,
Um, and it's just painful in either direction. And it's so needless. Like if we're in a world of dreams, like I can't even imagine this being the case. But just imagine Acolyte comes out and it's phenomenal. Like it's really good. Like the choreography is everything we've been promised by the people comparing it to Phantom Menace, and
yeah,
like the characters are rich and well developed, and it doesn't break any law, and it is just a good series. They're still
yeah,
going to be like, oh well, Disney Plus is down the toilet, so therefore it's because they go woke or go broke. And then on the other hand, even if it's a fantastically written series, if you point out like a small flaw, people will be like, "Oh, it's because you just hate women." Like, I think that's going to happen to Sheevan when he defended Andor, right? Like, because she and I love Andor, but
yeah,
like we'll point out, like it has a few, not many, but it has a few little plot problems, like a couple of contrivances that drive things here and there,
yeah.
and People then just like on the
Exactly.
opposite side were just like, oh, you're just a grifters who right wing grifters who hate Andor, and like,
We don't hate
we're
it.
both accused of being alt right and alt left and everything in between and upside
Yeah.
down and I just it's bananas. I don't understand people.
Some things are
Maybe
just
that's my problem.
I don't know, like a lot of media, and I know that this will obviously depend on the perspective and everything, but like there's a lot of media out there that I just don't think are worth a fight, you know? Like, and even with Andor, like,
What are you talking about? We must all die on the hill of Ahsoka being great. That's definitely where we need to plant our flag.
well, that's the frustrating one that comes up with Andor, is that like whenever you praise Andor and do so in such a way where it's like, well, you know, this thing is doing something that these other Disney Plus series are failing to do. You get all those defenders who get like vehemently angry at you about that, where they're like, ugh, why are you pitting these shows against each other? There's nothing wrong with the Ahsoka series or the Kenobi series. They're just doing different things. It has more of a whimsical feel to it compared to Andor. I'm just like, but that's, no, no.
There's a really fascinating thing. So like again, Doctor Who obviously is now being rebooted, like partly under the Disney umbrella, but it's really just being distributed by them. But like obviously, like it's now being this big thing, and it's got lots of marketing, and it's coming out periodically. The last episode has like one of the best instances I've ever seen of like a genuinely interesting writing criticism that can be made about a show that would like about an episode that would otherwise have been really good. But the second you make it, people, like half the people were like, "Oh, it's bad. This episode was bad because Black Doctor." Another half were like, "Oh, it's not bad. It's perfect. You just don't understand. You don't get the genius of it." Um,
Oh, God.
and like essentially what it was they were like, the episode is essentially about the idea of like that that some things are just beyond our understanding. Like there are things beyond understanding that makes them creepy.
Yeah,
The kind of the fear factor that goes into the unknowable, which is a
yeah,
really interesting thing to talk about and a really interesting
yeah,
thing from like an episode of television to discuss or explore or portray well. But then the problem was the ending of the episode like moved away from like, oh, this is something that theoretically has an explanation, but it's it's creepily beyond your grasp, to like, no, this is just flat out contradictory. It makes no fucking sense. Um, and people try to use the like, oh, the episode said it was a mystery. You're not supposed to get it, so actually it does work. You're just nitpicking. It's genius, and you just sit there and be like, oh my god,
kill
what are
me,
we even
kill
doing?
me.
Yeah.
Oh God! And by the way, is actually Andrew brought this up. I have heard this argument. By the way, I wish I hadn't, but I've heard this argument that it did poorly because Diego Luna was Mexican. Well, not necessarily Mexican, but I guess
Hang on,
Hispanic, just Hispanic in
didn't
general.
didn't
That's
didn't Critical Drinker put out like a meme from his like Reddit page where he was like, "Oh, it did the Disney series that did well were all led by like white cis male characters," and like he showed Andor's poster, and you're like,
yeah,
Diego Luna isn't white.
he's not white. Yeah, what the fuck? Oh God, it's so terrible. Like, what? First of all, who fucking gives a shit? Like the
I
race
don't
of the main
know.
character, but secondly, it's like he's not white. They didn't like it did not tank because of wokeness. There is no wokeness,
Yeah,
and
I mean,
it. God, I don't.
Andor did poorly in numbers because like Disney just didn't market it, and also because at the point it came out, everyone was so burned out, and still is.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's just, God, it's so awful. I know. I couldn't
Okay,
believe
and
that
just like
argument.
not drinker himself, his community. But even so, like the fact that that's the kind of community he's accumulated tells you something about his powers of. Oh my god! Actually, I was going to say, Odrin, did Sheev ever show you, or Southpaw ever show you like what Drinker said about Midsummer?
No, I mean to be
Oh, at
fair,
some
I've
point.
I've not seen that movie because it just didn't really interest me. But what was the argument though?
Oh, it's hard to summarize, but basically, like he just kept on making these incredibly like bizarre, misogynistic like perspective, like criticisms against the main character, like basically saying that her abusive and terrible boyfriend was right all along, and that she's just a horrible person. That the movie's pushing some kind of strange agenda. Like, it's too much to go over now. But if you ever want to
Oh
like give
God.
yourself traumatic brain injury for fun, dig into it because it's something else.
I have heard that that's like one of his more controversial like videos that he's gotten a lot of pushback on, but I just didn't really. I've never looked into it, and I don't know the specifics. But oh God. And well, and I know that I haven't had like the courage to watch it, but I know that on his recent podcast, um, or live stream, whatever, they did talk about the Assassin's Creed drama, and I think fucking heel versus babyface was there and shit. I'm just I wanted to watch it and prep for this, like to talk about some of their arguments and dismantle them, but I never got around to it, unfortunately.
Well, we've kind of
All I
covered their
did get a chance to
arguments.
watch. Yeah, I mean, I covered the some of the stupid arguments from fucking Synthetic Man, and he had even worse ones. Like I just, God, that dude is just vile. Like I,
Yeah, he's a. Is he the same? Remind me, he's the same guy who was like really anti God of War Ragnarok because of all the characters that come out and stuff,
oh
right?
yes, and he said some like he makes EFAP look like Saints. Like he's that bad. Like he like well, and obviously, and they were calling him out as well because they covered his stream. But like, yeah, he said some things during his Ragnarok coverage that is genuinely horrifying. Like, I don't know why his YouTube channel didn't like get banned or anything. I'm not going to try to get him banned, but I'm just saying, like, I'm surprised with some of the things he said. I don't know how he still has a channel.
YouTube being inconsistent in the way they apply their incredibly like weird and Byzantine rules. Perish the thought.
Yeah, God. But yeah, I don't know.
I guess the God of War Ragnarok one kind of applies because it's the same kind of thing, right? People are like, oh, it's a Norse set game, you can't have black characters, and like you have to like again, like even just forgetting the fact like it's about gods and like myths, like Jesus.
Yeah, I mean,
And even
I mean, because it was, because, God, what's her, Angrboda,
yeah,
because she's like not a massive character in the game, I don't think it was really, like, or debate or whatever you want to call it, or a shit fit that didn't really go very far, like people didn't really complain about it that much. But it did happen often enough where I'm just like, oh God, are we seriously doing this again?
it's a game about Earth gods intended for teens and adults. Yes, it's a
Earth
movie about
wizards.
space wizards.
Yeah, yeah, it's a movie about Norse wizards
I was about to say,
intended
given the
for.
Rainbow Bridge, given the Rainbow Bridge, it's more like that thing from the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, where John Hurt just suddenly comes to and goes interdimensional beings. In point of fact,
Yeah. Well, and when it comes to that one, like I don't know, maybe it's just me, but like I found Angrboda like kind of charming. I don't know,
I
like
thought
I
she
thought she
was
was fine.
great.
Yeah, like I thought she
I
was
think
like
that
a
game is
wholesome character.
excellent.
Yeah, especially with her
I
relationship with Atreus and everything. Like I don't know, I liked it. I thought it
I
was kind of sweet.
I can't even begin to describe how much more I care about whether a character is well written than what the fuck color they are.
Exactly. Like it just so annoyed. It's so annoyed. And look, like I am hoping that they do right by Yasuke. I'm hoping that they do his story right. Um Both in terms of like the context of the Japanese culture that he becomes a part of, and in terms of like his like where he comes from. Um and just in terms of his general personality and like the people he interacts with and whatever story arc he goes on. I do hope for the best for that character, and I hope it's one that's actually like enjoyable.
Well, that's the
But
thing, right? Like, if the game comes out and we have a criticism of Yasuke and the way he's handled, it'll almost certainly be the fact that they just did a shit job of incorporating him.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
not the fact that he exists, or
Yeah,
not the
like
fact that
I
not even the fact that that's what they attempted.
yeah. No, and I think I mentioned it earlier, but I would actually I'm gonna be like really frustrated, honestly, if they don't at least like touch upon or dive into a little the fact that he is a foreigner. If he is just like immediately like kind of a samurai doing samurai things, that's actually going to frustrate me a little bit. I actually want them to like uh similarly with something like The Last Samurai and other, Dances with Wolves and other pieces of media like it. I hope they actually like get into the fact that like this is a new culture for him who ends up becoming a part of it. You know what I mean?
I'm about I'm about to draw a really weird comparison, so bear with me in case you haven't seen this film. Did you ever
Yeah.
watch the Kevin Costner Robin Hood Prince of Thieves movie?
I didn't actually.
Okay, so in the movie, obviously Kevin Costner plays Robin Hood with an American accent, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, yeah.
But one of the other main characters, because like he starts off in the Holy Land on Crusade and he comes back to England, but one of the characters he comes back with is a Moorish man played by Morgan Freeman. And I can't believe I'm going to say this. Like, they actually do a really good job of handling the fact that like a black man with in Moorish garb and a scimitar wandering around Nottingham in in the 13th century causes people to like take notice. Like eyebrows are raised, people ask questions. Like, there's actually a really nice little scene where like the Robin Hood's like assembling the the merry men and they're camping off in Sherwood Forest or whatever, and
Yeah.
like all the oppressed villagers are kind of flocking to them because there's a campaign of terror being waged by the sheriff. And Morgan Freeman's character is like talking to some of the children, like these these local English children, and one of them is like, "Oh, did God paint you?" And Morgan Freeman's like, "Did God paint me?" And then like just laughs it off and is like, "Yes, of course, for certain, God painted me." And the kid's like, "Why?" And he's like, "Well, because Allah is a loves wondrous variety." And then they just, I just honestly, it's such a charming little moment. I'm like, yeah, that's how you do that kind of addressing of this kind of topic in a way
Yeah.
that's like just decent.
Yeah. Do you you've seen the director's cut of Kingdom of Heaven, correct?
Yes, I have. Yeah,
It's a very small moment, and he's like a pretty minor character in the movie. But towards the beginning of the movie, Liam Neeson, his whole kind of crew of like knights and stuff that he brings with him when he's going to visit Balian. He has, I think, like a Coptic Christian, and I'm assuming that's what he is. Like in his entourage, he's a black dude.
yeah,
And when like I said, it's kind of like a blink if you miss it moment. But when he's in the French village, these little like French kids are like pointing at his skin, because I'm sure they probably have never seen a black dude before, and he's just like he just points right back at them. Like he takes it in stride. He doesn't give a shit. He just like points right back at their skin. It's just like, and it's like a small little moment, where it's just like, yeah, this is, you have somebody from a different culture who's you know uh, in that sort of environment where they've never seen somebody like him. They see it as an oddity, but he just takes it in stride, and it's like kind of like an ice breaky kind of moment between them, where and he like flicks one of their noses or something. Like I said, it's a very small little moment, but it's something like that where I'm like, I don't know, it's just kind of a neat little thing, where they actually address it, but they do it in a way that doesn't like denigrate like either of them, you know?
yeah. Or I mean, the thing is, like, it's even I'll go out there and say that it's even like artistically viable to have a film, I think, where like you do denigrate them, provided the film, like provided the point of that is to draw attention to that as a subject. The idea of their ignorance.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
kind of do that in
Oh,
Star Trek Next Generation with Data, right? Like, because obviously Data's an android, and
yeah,
like early in season two, they bring on a new doctor onto the ship who's like incredibly rude to him and dismissive of him and just treats him like a machine, like an appliance.
right.
Um, because she's like, well, yeah, you might act like a person, but like you're still a machine.
Yeah.
And they go through this whole arc of him proving him like he is actually like a person, and like having to eat crow and like admit she was wrong. And like I think that's really interesting. Like, in the Enlightened Federation, you still have this kind of bigotry, and
Yeah,
they actually
yeah. And
explore it.
yeah, exactly. You explore like all of the painful realities of that, but then there's also the element of overcoming it. There's the element of one character is overcoming their own ignorance by the end. And you know, basically seeing each other as people rather than like, seeing uh one side as being superior to the other or something like that. It's there's it's always like a satisfying kind of story to explore where um, two people who have ignorant views about each other basically come together by the end. And like I said, I hope they incorporate elements of that into this game, but we'll have to see, I guess.
A dark humor part of me does want to see like almost like a subversion of that though, where like you have this like almost like at the end of Pocahontas, when she like throws herself onto John Smith and she's like no, and like they're all like, I guess we have all these things in common. I want them to have that moment where like they're all lined up for war and like one of them's like, no, we're all the same, and like some of them start putting their weapons down, and then one group's like, nah, we still think they're savages, and just gonna carry on attacking, just like
Oh
screwing.
God.
Just like
Jeez, that would be
just
dark.
no, but like just to have this sort of like comedy moment where they're just like, "Oh, we've all learned something." It's like, not us. We're still ignorant idiots.
Well, because that's the thing. I mean, there are some people that never change and never shake off their attitudes or whatever
It just
ignorant.
reminded me.
Yeah.
Did you see the thing with Elon Musk in Fallout where he was like, because the tagline of Fallout is "War never changes," and then
Yes.
Elon Musk posted like the whole, "Oh, actually, war does change," and someone was like, You're such an idiot." Dude.
Actually, yeah, it's just
Actually, war does
so
change. It's like you are
God.
Voltec. You are exactly what this fucking franchise is satirizing, my dude.
Yeah, seriously. Like, if ever we end up in that future, it's gonna be because of dudes like him. Ugh.
Dude bros. We're ending up in the dude bro timeline. Can we not? Can we get bored of the timeline quickly? Get Doctor Strange to like go back and change it.
We need to reset. We've gone wrong
Like
somewhere
we're
along the
all
line.
yeah, 2035, we're all suffering under the dude bro apocalypse, and we just meet Stephen Strange in the street, and he's like, "I'm sorry, Tony, this was the only way."
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's funny because with the thing that we were talking about earlier, I mean, I'm a massive fan of the Witcher games. I think I've said before that in the next game, which I think is actually being worked on now, like I don't know if it's going to be called The Witcher 4 or whatever, but I would love it if whoever the protagonist is, I want it to be Ciri personally. I want Ciri to be kind of the main character in the next game. I mean, I know that she obviously played a big role in The Witcher 3, but I would love to actually be able to play as her for like an entire game. Um, and
I
I want it
guess.
to take place like I mean, there's obviously considerations from a gameplay standpoint because she's pretty OP, but um
Well, also, doesn't she end up as queen in one of the possible endings?
in one of the that's I mean, that's one of the difficulties is that you would have to canonize one of the ending. Um or have it in such a way that she ends up getting deposed or something like that.
I was about to say,
Um
have you read the books?
I have, yes.
Yeah, so you know where she ends up in the books.
I do. Yeah.
Because that would be bananas if they did that at the end of like Witcher 4, like you play through the whole thing and then she just ends up marrying like one of the knights of the round table in like in Arthur in England. And it's like, oh, okay,
Oh,
I guess that's when we finished up then.
that ending was weird, yeah. But yeah, I mean, but in any case, I mean, let's just say that you get to play as her, or you get to play as one of the other Witchers, whoever it is. I would love it if it takes place in like Zerrikania, or you know, what the fuck is that place that the traders are from in the DLC? Ophir,
Yeah.
which has kind of like a Middle Eastern vibe to it. I would love it if you had like this pale as white fucking like Polish ass looking character who ends up like in one of those places, and like they are kind of like the fish out of water, and in one of those from their point of view exotic locations. I just God, I want something like that so bad. Like I said, and we use the Lord of the Rings example with like Umbar or Harad or Khand or Rune. Like I want like one of these fantasy franchises to be set in one of those locations. I want a story set in one of those locations. I am hungry for it. I'm desperate for it, and we're still not getting it, and it's so frustrating.
Yeah, just
Ugh.
the list of games like that. Where I'm like, I wish they'd make a game of this, or I wish they'd make a game of this, or it's just like, oh man,
Yeah, yeah.
shut up and
It's
take
just
my money.
yeah, because like I guarantee you, I mean, I hope not, but I guarantee you that whenever that game gets announced, it's gonna be like in the Northern Realms again, and I'm just like, oh God, we've already
Well,
done this.
we were kind of talking about like Red Dead Redemption before the stream started. And like, you know what would be a great one for Red Dead 3 is the Adventures of Sadie Adler in South America.
Oh, yeah, I've said that as well. Sadie in South America, and you could even like incorporate like Jack into that, like because like I don't know, maybe he like fled to Mexico because they found out that he killed Edgar Ross or something, and he ends up like bumping into her or something. I don't know. You like I feel like that's the only direction you could really go in a game that takes place after RDR1, because like the Wild West is
Done. Yeah,
virtually dead by that point, so you would have to like take it to Mexico or something, really.
yeah. Go to Mexico or Bolivia or somewhere like that.
Yeah, yeah. No, that would be
Join join
awesome.
join. I guess you could go out to Mexico and join up with what's his face. Oh my god, really like historical Pancho Villa.
Oh
Um,
yeah, Pancho Villa, yeah.
so
Oh, that'd be kind of neat.
I guess Reyes was kind of that, right? Reyes was basically just Pancho Villa.
He was, I think. I think he was the equivalent of Pancho Villa. That's what he was supposed to be. And then he ends up becoming a tyrant himself.
Go and join
Rip.
Shay. Go down to Chile and join Shay. You know,
Yeah.
that's yeah.
Um,
That's I guess the broader point, like, and this is kind of our hope for Yasuke, right? It's like just a game where you get to be a fish out of water in a way that is like interestingly incorporating that into the gameplay. Um,
yeah.
but
Yeah.
without making you like a messiah character, because I feel like that's almost the thing they will go down, right? If you have this kind of world where like you are such an out like it's such a kind of unique oddity, they have to also then endow you with some kind of like specialty, like or specialness that like makes you just like stand out from everyone intrinsically. I'm like,
Yeah.
no, I just want a game where I'm just a foreigner in a foreign, a stranger in a foreign land, and can make my own way.
I guess I understand why it would be easy to sort of fall into that trap, I suppose. Like if you're gonna do a story like that. But yeah, I mean, I hope that you can avoid it. Like I said, I feel like something like The Last Samurai avoided that. I didn't really see him as a messiah. Um, so I don't
No,
know.
absolutely. It's
Yeah.
kind of the way I always used to play before the games became shit, like the Elder Scrolls games. I always be like, I'm gonna be like the deadly enemy faction of like, like you're in Skyrim, like, oh, they are dark elf because they have bad history with the dark elves, and like it'll be interesting to play like the foreigner in a foreign land, stranger in a foreign land thing.
Yeah, yeah. And you can even do it in such a way like I mean, in Dances with Wolves, the tribe end up like finding him if I remember correctly, because he's just like in this like small fort by himself, because there's no other soldiers that have arrived there. So he's just in this like lone little camp like by himself, and eventually they get curious and they go over to like investigate and see what's going on with him because he's like in their general vicinity of that native tribe, that plains tribe. So yeah, it's not even that he like ingratiates him. He does ingratiate himself with them once he realizes that they're interested in him. But I mean, like he doesn't really initially go seeking them out, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah,
Um,
I think it's been a while since I watched that movie, but yeah, I think
yeah,
that's
yeah,
how it plays out.
yeah, yeah. So it's not like, oh, I am here to save you. I am your white savior. It's like no, it doesn't play out like that at all. And they end up saving him, yeah, because he ends up getting captured by his by the soldiers at the end. Um,
Oh, those damn evil white people.
yeah.
Those cursed white folk, those white devils.
So, yeah. I don't know. I'm probably going to get Assassin's Creed Shadows. I mean, the thing with Assassin's Creed is that it's a bit of a guilty pleasure for me. Every time I pick up a new Assassin's Creed game, I don't go into it with the expectation that I'm going to have my mind blown. But I do pick it up with the expectation that it's like I'm going to enjoy myself a little bit, you know? Like it's a reliably fun game to me. Um, but just not game of the year material. So I don't know. I will more than likely play Shadows eventually. Probably not at launch, but like eventually down the line. Um, I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
With Shadows, I think I'm gonna wait to see how it's received because with AC, I'm just a bit burnt out. Like I
Yeah,
played basically all of them, including Liberation, all the way up until I think until Assassin's Creed Rogue, and then I didn't get Rogue. I did
yeah.
get Unity. I didn't get Syndicate. I did get Origins, and then I haven't really played one since. Like I kept an eye on the story just to see if it was worth diving back into. But I am kind of just burnt out on the franchise now. I think it just needs a real like injection of magic for me to get reinvested in that world. They need to really pull something out of the bag, and maybe they will. And like in which case, I will give Shadows a fair shot. But I guess the problem they've got is like I have Ghost of Tsushima, and like I really like Ghost of Tsushima.
Yeah. That's another
So
problem. You know, that is actually kind of a funny problem that they're running into now is that like they had their chance to like come out with like a Japanese Assassin's Creed or a game that basically has those kind of action stealth mechanics. But unfortunately Ghost of Tsushima beat to the punch. Like they waited too long to come out with this and now
yeah,
they lost it
well,
out
'cause
to them.
Ghost of Tsushima 2 is like in the works, right? Like it's gonna be out like next year or the year after that. So like you're gonna have
Yeah.
Shadows come out, and like here's the doomsday scenario, I guess, for Ubisoft, or at least for Ubisoft employees. I'm sure the CEOs will still be making out like bandits, but Shadows goes down in flames, let's say, and then like the year passes, and as no one really gives a shit about Assassin's Creed anymore, and they're trying to like desperately reboot, and then Ghost of Tsushima 2 comes out and is really well liked. Like just as a comparison, that's like the nightmare scenario, and I think it's likely, honestly.
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh, honestly, like I I could honestly say pretty confidently right now that Ghost of Tsushima 2 will be better than whatever
Will
Shadows
be
is.
better than yeah.
Shadows might be fine. Don't get me wrong, it might be fine, but Ghost of Tsushima 2 will more than likely be better.
Well, if for no other reason than I actually give a shit about the characters, it's Ghost of Tsushima.
Well, and the mechanics, like gameplay wise, I think it does
Yeah,
Assassin's Creed better than Assassin's Creed. Like that's
and
just the
it
reality.
looks absolutely stunning, and like it's got all these like novel little game. Like the idea that you don't have a waypoint, you just have the wind directing you. Like you just pay attention to where the wind's blowing and stuff like that. It's just really, I just, man, it's a beautiful game.
It might even it might end up even like capturing the Japanese cultural elements better than Shadows does too. I don't know.
Oh, probably. Well, I mean, I guess we'll have to wait and see. But like, I know Ghost of Tsushima did it well enough that the game makers got like invited to Tsushima and like generally applauded by Japanese people in Tsushima.
Yeah. Oh, did you? It's a quick anecdote, but do you recall that I think during one of the storms or one of the tsunamis or something, there was like a gateway that like got destroyed essentially, like one of those like sacred gateways. I forget what they're
Yeah.
called. And a bunch of Ghost of Tsushima fans basically like rallied around that, and they did a GoFundMe that basically like it made like 10 times the asking price that the priest like put the GoFundMe up for in order to repair the thing. And they ended up raising like 8 times that amount. It's just such
You
an
see,
awesome like feel good story about like gamers.
well,
The
again, so this
Tory
is the
Gate,
kind of
yes.
this is the kind of thing where I'm like, this is why one of the reasons why it really pains me that we have to have these bullshit culture war discussions about games because like that story is a great anecdote, and like you have other things as well. Like obviously with the Star Wars fandom, you have the 501st Legion of fans who like routinely do things to help their community and are just generally like decent people. And you hear all these like lovely stories about like people who've played games about cultures they never experienced and learn really cool things, and so they go and like learn about that thing. Like I have a friend, for example, who they ended up doing their masters in Turkish history because they loved Assassin's Creed Revelations so much, um,
Mm,
and like they actually helped one of their like friends helped advise. You know how Assassin's Creed Origins had the kind of tour mode where you could like go around and learn about ancient Egypt,
yes.
which I thought was a nice thing to have in the game. He helped like them work on that, which I thought was really cool. And like,
Oh,
there's just so much potential with games to be like these incredible bastions of just artistic brilliance and
yeah.
and and interhuman connection. Like Journey, I don't know if you remember Journey, that little short game.
Vaguely, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, like one of the most profoundly beautiful artistic experiences I've ever encountered in any kind of art medium is just playing that game and like the kind of eerie beauty and like the loneliness of it. And you come across another player and like you can only communicate in these like weird like harmonic notes and like it's all about the spontaneous collaboration that happens as a result, even without language.
Mm.
And it's just really cool. Or even like it's almost a meme, right? Well, that kind of thing of like people being like ride or die in Call of Duty, where like like in real life I wouldn't give you a buck, but in Call of Duty I'll take that grenade for you, comrade. Like,
Uh,
just things like that. All these beautiful things that like, art can do and games could do, and instead we have to wade through crap.
yeah, it's like a two-pronged problem. I mean, not that we don't still like get a really special gem in the gaming industry. I mean, we do, and we always will. But by and large, there's a lot of problems that we get in the mainstream game industry, and some of them come from the griftosphere, as you call them. People like that who are just catching on to something and exploiting it for their own ends. But then the other side of it comes from a lot of the publishers themselves, like the big
Yeah,
publishers like Ubisoft.
the
Um,
capitalism element of it.
yeah, and it's just a shame. And I'm hoping that we can like work past that and just get some better experiences that are beneficial to everybody. But I don't know.
Yeah, get Rockstar to do another game where they spend like hours and hours getting their developers to accurately model how horse testicles shrink in the cold. That's
God, yeah. Oh. I mean, well, when it comes to Rockstar, they spend like what 7 years working on like one game. Like that's their approach, where it's like a
yeah,
one game at a time type of thing. At
and
least
they
it
do really
was.
well. They
Yeah.
like GTA 5 made like what like $1 billion or over $1 billion
Yeah.
dollars.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think
Um,
CD Projekt Red has the same approach. Now I know that Cyberpunk obviously had a ton of issues when it launched, but it's a fantastic game now. Um,
I've
so
heard. So I've never actually played Cyberpunk, but I have heard that it almost had a No Man's Sky kind of arc where like the
oh, even
developers really stuck with it and fixed it.
even more so, yeah. I think they spent something like $3 million just to like basically improve the image of that game and like fix all of the problems that game had. Like they poured like a significant investment into it because they followed the Rockstar model of pouring all of their time and resources into one game at a time. They couldn't really afford for that game to fail, so they really spent a lot of money and effort making that game like way better, and I think it really paid off for them.
Well,
Um,
wasn't there the thing of like the reason it was so broken on release was like again it was this is capitalism at play. Like the shareholders were pushing them to release early because they wanted a good quarterly like profit margin,
oh
and
yeah,
so
it was
like
definitely something like that. Yeah.
yeah, so they just shoved it out early when it wasn't even finished. Like it was broken. You had like the amazing nudity glitch, which was just the funniest thing I've seen in a while.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Like if
and
that
just
game if that game had launched in the state that it's in now, it could have easily been game of the year.
oh yeah, and this is the thing, right? Like I imagine the higher ups who are, in terms of the actual game developers, not the business people who are on CD Projekt Red, are furious at like how badly their reputation got tanked by
Hmm.
that whole shit. Like, although I say that, like, we also need to, and again, this is a combination of capitalism, but also it's facilitated by people down the chain who are theoretically artists themselves. Like the reports of crunching at CD Projekt Red and
Yeah.
like ninety
Rockstar
five,
too. Rockstar had those reports as well.
yeah, like 90-hour game, like weeks, and like people working through the weekend, and just it's just
Ugh.
I think it's I don't even want that. Like I would rather live in a because part of the problem we also have with games is like there are so many different games coming out at once that like even good games might just get lost in the mix. Like I would rather live in a world where I get one or two or three very good games a year that I buy. Like big budget AAA games that I buy, and then like a couple of smaller ones, indie games on the side, and wait for like 3 years for the same, or 4 years, or 5 years even for like the studio to come up with their next project and then make it really good. Because like
Well, you
there's enough
know,
studios to keep me tided over.
well, it's funny you mentioned that because that's kind of how I've become with a lot of media, uh, even now. Like I'm kind of at that point personally, like where I only purchase like I don't know, 5 new games a year, something like that. Like I only really bother to get the ones that I know are really gonna appeal to me and like really be special, and I just don't have the time to deal with anything else. And it goes the same with like movies and TV shows. I only watch like maybe 3 new movies in theaters like every year because those are the only ones that I actually care about enough to want to spend the money to go see in a movie theater. So I don't know. I am kind of at that position now where I will only like bother with the stuff that seems really special.
Yeah, and I think that's a healthy attitude to have. I think the industry would be vastly improved if everyone took that attitude, honestly, because it would force developers and studios to actually spend time and money, and also it would kind of kill in the cradle this kind of just drive to the bottom for gutting innovation out of the industry and gutting imagination out of the industry.
Yeah.
Um, because obviously we've kind of reached a point now, and Assassin's Creed is kind of similar to this, where every game, AAA game, looks the same. Like it's the same mechanics, the same sandbox, the same. Like they're all becoming one
Mm,
monolith, and
yeah.
it's really tedious. Like when I mean, a good example is like when Horizon Zero Dawn came out, I really liked it because it was something bold and imaginative and new from like an indie studio. Like they did a really great job with it. And then like Horizon Two came out, and it's basically just the same game again. Like there's a couple of added on mechanics but it's basically just Assassin's Creed with a couple of other extra things bolted on in a slightly strange setting. Like it's very the differences are shallow. At that point,
Yeah.
I'm like, I would rather just spend 85 quid of my hard-earned cash waiting for a well-reviewed game that is actually going to like give me, like Baldur's Gate 3, that is actually like a new experience that I'm going to like that will be with me artistically forever.
No, I agree. And honestly, it's funny you bring that game up because that's like I stopped playing Horizon 2. I just lost interest for basically the reason that you just mentioned. Like it just felt like the same experience. And I know that obviously the story is different and it continues on like Aloy's story or whatever, but like gameplay wise it just like this just felt like more of the same. And I mean, maybe I'm a hypocrite because, like I said, I do play like every Assassin's Creed game, even though it is basically the same shit every time. But I don't know. I guess it's just because I've been doing it for so long when it comes to Assassin's Creed that I don't know. I just keep doing it. It's like a habit for me at this point.
Oh
Um,
yeah, fair.
that's like the one exception. But for the most part, yeah, I will only get stuff that looks like it's actually going to be like an interesting or unique or uh, experience or whatever that really appeals to me.
Absolutely, and even then, I'm gonna wait to see the reviews first. Like, for example, like
Oh
Stalker, the
yeah,
new Stalker game is coming out, and like I'm hyped for Stalker because I really liked the first Stalker. um,
yeah.
but as hyped as I am and as cool as the trailers look, I am waiting because I had the same thing with Atomic Heart, where I was like, that looks really cool, and then they came out, and you're like, oh god, what is this?
Do not pre-order. Yeah, that's just the philosophy.
Yeah,
Do not
just
pre-order games.
don't pre-order, and also like find critics you trust. Like it's weird. At the end of my what is going to be like an 8 hour Ahsoka series of critique, um, my central through line is like why capitalism is pretty bad for these industries. But my ending thing is like as you know people who like art, whether you're a critic or a casual enjoyer, we all just have to become really like better as a community and like not just making ourselves better critics of games and like taking the time to actually like find out what's a good product for ourselves, but also like finding critics you trust, who can be trusted to give you like an honest appraisal of something without their own money grubbing or their own politics blending into it.
Yeah.
Like we almost
Yeah.
have to become better critics of critics. It's a very strange situation we're in, but like I'm glad to hear that at least you're doing it. Because my God, it's like we need to. The
I
industry as
don't
it is needs to go away.
it's it's sad. The sad reality though is that like I don't think enough people are. There's I don't want to call it the lowest common denominator, but I guess that is kind of what I'm referring to here. There are a lot of people that will just like consume whatever. It's the same reason why like I don't think Andor in terms of viewership was as successful as like the other Star Wars shows, even though it deserves to like surpass all of them. I mean, it's completely anecdotal. I think I've mentioned this to you and a few others, but I talked to some people in my office, and a few of them said that they found Andor boring, but they enjoyed Ahsoka. And I didn't make an issue of it. I didn't like get into an argument with them, but I was just like inwardly, I was kind of rolling my eyes. I'm just like, oh God. It just makes me think. It makes me wonder. Like, are most people out there like that? Like, do they just want like the
Slop.
conventional like middle of the road like blockbuster stuff? That's all they want? I don't know.
Because I mean, like, here's the thing. I kind of get that, right? And that like the world is so stressful right now. We're all being worked so fucking hard for so little return, and just so much shit drives our. We're so worn down by everything. And we just live in a technological era where like our attention is constant. People like everything is trying to grab our attention all at once, all the time. So we're all kind of developing ADHD. Um, so having a long attention span or having just the mental energy to like sit through and pay attention to a certain level to a thing can be very wearing. And just the idea of it, like, you come home from the office on a Friday night and you don't want to have to sit through like a philosophical lecture. You just want to like watch things go bang on screen. And I
Yeah.
totally understand that. But we should be able to live in a world where like those things exist and are competently written. Because like here's the thing, like you can have like just popcorn entertainment that isn't shit. Um,
The funny
and
thing is, I find Andor to be like I find it to be a show that I could just like tune into on like a Saturday and enjoy myself. Like there's plenty of action. There's plenty of those kinds of like moments in a show like that, you know?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I agree, but it is just that thing of there's a place for fast food in everyone's diet, I guess, but and you
Yeah.
wouldn't want to live in a world where only all you get is gourmet Michelin star menus because that would just get wearing and be too much. But also, people are now being encouraged to eat actual shit off their plate and then be told that that's popcorn, and no one seems to be noticing, or at least if they are noticing, they've ceased to care, and that's kind of what I rail against.
Right, right. Like not enough attention is being given to like the really exceptional uh you know non-mainstream stuff, if you will, or whatever you want to call it. Like I isn't the Mad Max spin-off, isn't that like struggling right now at the box office?
Furiosa just had the
Yeah.
worst Memorial Day weekend opening of any film in history, except maybe
Oh
Garfield.
God, yeah, like that's so
Um,
sad, like something like that.
Kraft mac and cheese. If your parents don't buy it, stop loving them. Yeah, it does. The thing is, like, I yeah, it's that. Except instead of the Disney are like have your Kraft mac and cheese, but then what they actually put on your plate is just like recycled diarrhea. But for some reason, people are just like still slurping it up, and it's just I'm just sitting there like
Ugh.
looking at them in bemusement, being like, "But do you not get what you're putting in your mouth?" Like, it's
Well,
just
yeah,
I don't
because like
know.
like we reached our breaking point when it comes to stuff like that. Like I'm no longer watching any of the Star Wars stuff unless I hear good things about it or unless it's Andor. Like I hit my limit with that. I'm sure you've hit your limit. Other people have hit their limit with other things. It's just like I don't know. When is the rest of the general audience going to hit their limit? Because like
Well,
I don't know.
I do think that like the I will just eat slop and never complain crowd is much smaller than we think. Like then it tends to seem right. Like I think actually the majority of people are in the camp of like they'll tolerate it for a little while, but then like they'll not even necessarily consciously they'll just be like, oh man, no, I don't really want to watch this thing again. Like it's just this samey, and I just no, and then just get turned off it. And the way that you just get like if you got served mac and cheese every meal, you just get bored,
Yeah.
right? Like I think it's I think there's an element of that hitting. Like the MCU is a good example, right? The MCU could put out three incredible movies in the next year, and people would still not really care. Not because it's just because they're burnt out on it. They just don't care.
I think maybe after like after the third good movie, I would start to take interest again, I would say. Like because I more than likely would not have watched the first two, but then once I've heard that it's like, hey, this is the third movie in a row in the MCU that's been like really good, like they're on to like a really good pattern. At that point, I might be like, okay, let me take a look at that then, you know?
Yeah. Um, I think a part of this as well is also just like in terms of like why do we keep on getting this slop is the the marketing, like the the financing model of how these things get produced, like the AAA games or like the large production films, Hollywood films, is that like these studios pour like they basically bet the house on every one of them, right? They're like, oh, we're going to pour $500 million into this thing, like every time, and then if
Yeah,
it fails, you're
yeah.
fucked. And the only way you can survive then is by cutting everyone's jobs and making their life miserable and like cutting out the costs by like stripping them of human workers and putting in AI and all this kind of shit.
Oh, and
It's just terrible.
the video game industry definitely is suffering from that too. Like
Oh yeah,
some of these things have bloated budgets, and like so many gamers, time and again, will try and tell these studios like we do not care about the graphical fidelity all that much. We care more about the gameplay, and they just like they don't listen. They keep pouring their budgets into like the graphics and everything, and it's just like some of the budgets on these games, just like with movies, are obscene. And yeah, like you said, there's the infringement of certain things like AI, which is just ugh, we're getting into like a bleak era with that now.
yeah. And like there's another reason, like an argument in favor of spacing out your development timetables, because like if you have a 7-year period, like like Rockstar spend a lot of money on their games, developing their games, but a the entire studio is working on it, and b it's over 7 years, so like the actual budget per year is probably less than like Activision spend making Call of Duty,
Yeah,
like every year
yeah, yeah,
for in, for increasingly for an increasingly shit Call of Duty game every year.
yeah.
And so you wonder whether we'd be best served by having a model of like, rather than it was 20th Century Fox making one $500 million movie every year. Can we just have like one $250 million film every 3 years and like five or six $50 million movies, you know, around them? Because
I
some
don't.
of the best films I've seen have been like that kind of mid range budget recently.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense to me, but uh, I guess it doesn't make sense to the shareholders and people like that, you know?
Well, the reason is because it's short. It's almost like the it's to avoid derailing. I won't stay on this for long because I don't want to derail the stream into like me ranting against capitalism.
That's okay.
um, but it's almost like the same thing you get with like banks, right? Of like the reason when we had the subprime mortgage crisis, and the reason that happened essentially was because like they took all the safety guardrails out so that they could just bet the house every time because they wanted like to have short term massive payouts. Like they wanted to be able to take home that bonus of like $30 million, right, in a year.
Yeah,
And you can only really do that if you just like bet the house every time and hope you win. And then, if you fail, everyone gets fucked. It's the same thing with movies, right? Like these shareholders who are not movie makers don't give a fuck about film, don't give a fuck about art. Like these are just like corporate like entities, corporate suits who like were churned out of like Harvard Business School, whose daddies were like billionaires. And the only reason they're in the art industry rather than any other industry is like once upon a time they had pretensions of being an artist before daddy beat it out of them, right? And now fancy themselves to be great artists. And they're making all these decisions, being like, I want, like, oh yeah, I want the kind of like the glamour of working in the arts, but I don't understand art. And I also want to have like my $50 million bonus this year so I can buy my 15th house and go on my third yacht.
oh
So we're
God,
gonna
yeah.
just like force a situation where like we make enough profit in a year to finance that. And the only way to do that is to literally bet the house in the year and hope you win.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I mean, I know he's not a shareholder. He's obviously he owns the company or whatever, or he's the CEO. But there's that picture that always makes me cringe every time I see it, of Bezos, uh, basically with the Rings of Power logo, and he's just like smirking because he's just like, "Hey, this is mine now." Like it's just that always gives me that vibe every time I see that picture, where it's just like this is just like a possession to him. Like this is a property to him. It's you know he fancies himself like somebody who's furthering creativity and art, but in reality, it's just like, yeah, this is the newest intellectual property that's under Amazon's purview. Like that's just
There
always how
is
I feel whenever I see that fucking picture.
Oh, I totally agree. There is again, sorry, I'm a Doctor Who fan, so I'm gonna reference Doctor Who again. You can't stop me. But like, there's an episode of Doctor Who that does this really like gets this incredibly this point like so well, which is like the Doctor ends up in a place where like it's a museum full of alien artifacts that like this billionaire has just bought up. Like he's like gone around the world buying like every single piece of alien like tech or like alien information or whatever that's fallen to Earth that he can find, and it's all in his like this deep storage underground museum like 500 feet below the desert in Utah and like hoarded there. And like the doctor is like, there's a point where like one of the things breaks out and starts killing everyone, and the doctor's berating this guy, and he's like, "Oh, mankind goes out into the universe to explore, to be part of something bigger." And this planet's like, "Yeah, exactly. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to touch the stars." And the doctor's like, "You didn't want to touch the stars. You just wanted to drag the stars down to your level and put them in boxes and label them. Like you're as far from the stars as you can get." And I'm like, that is that is just how I think about how all these billionaires operate.
Dalek. That's
Dalek. Yeah, the episode's
Dalek.
called Dalek.
Dalek.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know it. I haven't watched it, but Silent Sam mentioned it in the chat.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's good stuff. But yeah, that just entire mentality. Like when you hear like, oh, Jeff Bezos bought Rings of Power because his son likes Lord of the Rings, or like
Yeah.
Zuckerberg wants to own the metaverse. Or like it was almost like that meme that you occasionally see crop up on Twitter, where it's like, tech bro being like, oh, finally we've gotten the technology to recreate the Nightmare Machine 3000 from that dystopian sci-fi novel in the 1980s called "Don't Make the Nightmare Machine 3000."
Yeah. Oh God. Well, yeah, and all these people, like all the shit with AI and everything. It's like, did you motherfuckers like not watch a Terminator movie or something? Like, what are you doing? Oh,
Yeah, like Andrew's like, I bet his son loves Rings of Power. I remember him saying a
oh
quote of like his
yeah,
son was like, "Oh, my son will kill me if I get this wrong." I'm like, man,
yeah. Why didn't his son follow through on that? Come on,
yeah, please do us all a favor, friend.
get with it, Mr. Bezos Jr. Do it.
Yeah, and yeah, things
Ugh.
like that, or like the Netflix CEO being like, "Oh, if Lawrence of Arabia had been on Netflix and had been on a phone screen, no one would have cared." Like my son watched Lawrence of Arabia on a phone screen, and he didn't lose any value from not watching it at a cinema. And you just listen to these people say this kind of shit, and you're just like,
It's such bullshit.
"Why?" But yeah, it's just this is having people who don't care about art at all, even in the abstract, and who don't understand it at all, even to the most remote degree, in charge of the entire art industry is obviously a bad idea. Um,
Yeah.
the kind of comparison I would make is like Ferraris, which is like like Ferrari used to be like this family owned thing. Like it was created by Mr. Ferrari, and like used to be family owned. And it was like well designed, and everyone thought the Ferraris were just cool. Everyone thought they were cool. It was a car to have. If you were rich in the 70s and 80s and you wanted to buy a car, you got a Ferrari. And then like it was bought out by a foreign company that was just composed of technocrats who knew nothing about making cars, didn't give a shit about cars. It was just the product they sold as far as they were concerned. And immediately cutting corners, laying off engineers, like the long term engineers who were on the biggest wages because they knew how the thing worked and how to make new things. All of them got laid off, replaced with like cheaper new employees who would just do what they were told. And the quality of the Ferrari just went through the floor. And for a while, it coasted purely on its old reputation. And then everyone realized that, oh no, the only people who own Ferraris now are like tacky, uncool 55-year-old white guys with a paunch. And it's just a really shit car. And so they just stopped buying them. And like
Yeah.
that's almost what's happened to the movie industry, right? Like
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Every single entertainment industry, really. It's just, I know, it sucks. But I don't know. Like we said, all we can really do is just support the projects that really
that do
seem to
well.
have like yeah that had heart and creativity put into them, and passion. And if you want to get like the blockbuster stuff, like I said, I mean, I might end up getting Assassin's Creed Shadows, but I'm certainly not going to pre-order it, and I'm certainly going to wait for it to come out and see what people have to say about it. And you can bet that like if I do end up getting it, my reasons for getting it, uh, or rather, my if I don't end up getting it, my reasons for avoiding it are not going to be because there's a black guy in it or because there's gay romances in it. It's because of a lot of the other shit that comes with Ubisoft games.
Lies.
So
You're just a dreadful racist. That's what it is.
that's all it is. That's all it is.
Yeah. Not even to Yasuke, you just hate Japanese people. You're like, oh yeah, I love Yasuke. And they're like, no, it's set in Japan though. And you're like, oh, why
Oh,
do they have
that
to
would
ruin this?
That would be a twist where like you're in it for him, but not for the Japanese.
Yeah, you're like, oh, I really wanted to play a black samurai character, just not in Japan. Like,
What a twist.
oh, yeah, it's just yeah. I hope again, genuinely, I hope Assassin's Creed Shadows does well. I hope it's a good game. I hope that if it sells well and does well, that they take the right lessons from that. Um,
Yes.
they won't, but I hope they do. And I hope we can move to a point in these discussions where, like, yeah, Yasuke's race is just not a thing that we need to fucking talk about. And like, or rather, where the only time race ever comes up in an artistic discussion is in a discussion of how a piece of art did a poor job of representing a race, rather than like just its existence.
Right, right. Get into the finer details of what they've done right and what they've done wrong. Exactly. Um, if that game does sell well, imagine if we end up getting like 10 more Assassin's Creed games with a black samurai. It's like, no, no, that's not necessarily what we need. It's like,
Yeah, what they'll start doing is being like, oh, that people like this whole like black person in a different culture thing. Like, we're gonna do the Aztecs with a black guy. We're gonna do like Soviet Russia with a black guy. You're like,
yeah,
no,
yeah.
thank God.
Like that'll be the lesson that they'll take. Like even if it's like a positive thing, they'll still take the wrong lesson. But what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do when you
Uh,
dealing with these suits?
all you can do is hope it gets better. I might have to dash off, I'm afraid, because
Oh no,
it is
no.
getting
I think
towards my dinner time.
no, it's all good. I was about to wrap it up anyway, but thank you for coming along and discussing
No, my
this.
pleasure.
It's going to be interesting in a few months' time to see how that game shakes out. I'm certainly going to be paying attention to that.
Yeah,
So
I'd
yeah.
offer you a wager about how likely you think it is that they're gonna retrospectively like say that if doing poorly is because he's black or gay or something. But we all know that's what's gonna happen, so that's not a fair bet.
No, not at all.
But yes, thank you very much for inviting me on, Adrian. It's been a real pleasure talking to you as always. And yeah, I hope it's good. And until things start getting good, we'll have plenty to complain about, I guess.
Of course, of course. Well, your channel description, I put your channel in the description of the video,
Oh,
so if
thank you
anybody
very
wants to
much.
check you out, they can do so. But I'm sure, let's be honest, all these people, they know you better than they know me, so let's just be
I
real.
doubt it. I'm just
But
a strange entity that occasionally like goes into other people's streams and then like disappears again.
me too.
All
All
right. Well,
right,
night
take it
everyone.
easy. Bye bye.
Bye.